Don't miss the awesome Naruto stories my sister creates. Her last channel was hacked, so to stay in the loop, please subscribe to her new channel. It would mean a lot to her, and you won't regret it. Hello to all lovers of lemon scenes. I invite you all to my boosty so you can watch your favorite Naruto What If stories in complete comfort. A subscription to Naruto Lemon, the first video with a full lemon, is already on my boosty channel. Dare! Central. Once beautiful, the city now presented a pitiful sight. Cracks spread across the town like a grid, many houses were lopsided or completely collapsed. People ran in panic in all directions, and some stood completely still, offering prayers to a god in whom none of them really believed. What caused this chaos? The reason was known only to a few, and even they were silent. But now there is no point in hiding it in secret. A long time ago, a sage came to this earth and taught everyone his art, alchemy. He taught for free and, completely regardless of who he gave knowledge to, his students could be everyone without exception, from thieves to kings. Gradually, his students isolated themselves from the world and decided to create their own state. This was the beginning of a mistress. However, the sage had his own plans for him. Even if he did not demand payment from the students now, he would certainly demand it later. Then, when there are enough inhabitants in this country to carry out his plans, the sage will return again and demand his payment, but for now he will only rule from the shadows. But let's go back to the time when the main city of Amestris turned into a battlefield. In the very center of the city, near the main headquarters, a fierce battle took place. The outcome of this battle was to decide the fate of the entire country, and perhaps the world as a whole, because the sage returned and wanted the life of the entire large country in payment. For many years he had been making preparations and, with the help of people he artificially created, homunculi, he enclosed the entire country in one giant circle of transformation. The purpose of this circle was to create the greatest and most deeply disgusting creation of alchemy, the Philosopher's Stone. This piece of blood-red crystal was nothing more than a way to circumvent the principle of equal exchange, at least so it might seem only at first glance. But, alas, this was not so. Using this stone, the alchemist wasted the lives of those whose souls were imprisoned in this scarlet pebble. Why does the sage need this stone? Oh, the goal of this creature was extremely simple. He wanted to live and was afraid of death until his knees trembled. And now he came into battle with a very young man who managed to unravel the plan of action. This was the son of his old acquaintance Hohenheim. The young man's name was Edward Elric, better known as Fullmetal Alchemist. He received his nickname for the auto armor that replaced his right arm and left leg. He lost his left leg in an attempt to return his deceased mother, and gave his hand in exchange for the soul of his brother Alphonse, who died while trying to resurrect his mother. Edward attached his brother's soul to the armor, but now it was no longer important, because the armor was broken, and the soul of his only brother went beyond the brink. He wanted to live and was afraid of death until his knees trembled. And now he came into battle with a very young man who managed to unravel the plan of action. This was the son of his old acquaintance Hohenheim. The young man's name was Edward Elric, better known as Fullmetal Alchemist. He received his nickname for the auto armor that replaced his right arm and left leg. He lost his left leg in an attempt to return his deceased mother, and gave his hand in exchange for the soul of his brother Alphonse, who died while trying to resurrect his mother. Edward attached his brother's soul to the armor, but now it was no longer important, because the armor was broken, and the soul of his only brother went beyond the brink. He wanted to live and was afraid of death until his knees trembled. And now he came into battle with a very young man who managed to unravel the plan of action. This was the son of his old acquaintance Hohenheim. The young man's name was Edward Elric, better known as Fullmetal Alchemist. He received his nickname for the auto armor that replaced his right arm and left leg. He lost his left leg in an attempt to return his deceased mother, and gave his hand in exchange for the soul of his brother Alphonse, who died while trying to resurrect his mother. Edward attached his brother's soul to the armor. But now it was no longer important, because the armor was broken, and the soul of his only brother went beyond the brink. He received his nickname for the auto armor that replaces his right arm and left leg. He lost his left leg in an attempt to return his deceased mother, and gave his hand in exchange for the soul of his brother Alphonse, who died while trying to resurrect his mother. Edward attached his brother's soul to the armor, but now it was no longer important, because the armor was broken, and the soul of his only brother went beyond the brink. He received his nickname for the auto armor that replaces his right arm and left leg. He lost his left leg in an attempt to return his deceased mother, and gave his hand in exchange for the soul of his brother Alphonse, who died while trying to resurrect his mother. Edward attached his brother's soul to the armor, but now it was no longer important, because the armor was broken, and the soul of his only brother went beyond the brink. Edward Elric rushed towards his enemy with a furious cry. The death of the closest person clouded his mind. It never occurred to him to use alchemy. He was going to destroy his enemy in hand-to-hand combat. Moreover, now it was quite possible, the sage's strength was running out, he was no longer omnipotent. Elric struck blow after blow, hitting furiously, putting all his feelings into his fist. In the end, the sage began to fall into madness. Although his strength was drying up, he still remained, albeit to a lesser extent. A red flash illuminated the battlefield, red lightning shoots from the villain's body, and his lips mutter under his breath, "Stone, my stone. Philosopher's stone." Noticing one of his creations with his gaze, the sage rushed towards it. The target was Lingyao, now the homunculus grid. Oddly enough, this homunculus was not on the side of the bad guys at all. He was on the side of those whom he could call friends. But, unfortunately, he was not destined to survive this day. The sage's hand plunged into Grid's stomach and slowly but very confidently began to remove the philosopher's stone from it, and with it the identities of Grid and Ling. Grid is a homunculus of greed, but even he was not alien to the feeling of camaraderie, and he sacrificed himself for the sake of Ling's life. Merging with the sage, he began to influence his body, transforming its structure into charcoal. Noticing the changes, the sage decided to get rid of the homunculus personality as soon as possible. Well, while he was struggling with her, Edward Elric saw the moment and dealt a crushing blow. His fist pierced through the enemy's chest, and the souls absorbed by this creature began to burst out of it in incredibly large quantities. "Stone, my philosopher's stone," he said with doom and fear in his voice, and from the gaping hole in his chest, meanwhile, black ribbons began to appear, slowly beginning to entangle his body. "Go back to where you came from, test tube creature, homunculus," Edward said loudly, watching the slow death of his opponent. "Why? I just wanted to be free." The homunculus began to shout, but he no longer had the opportunity to complete his monologue. Black ribbons began to slowly squeeze him, as if he was falling into a funnel invisible to the naked eye. And so, with a slight pop, the homunculus disappeared from this world. It would seem that good has triumphed, but there were no those cries of joy, there was only the inevitable sadness of loss. Everyone looked at the remains of Alphonse Elric with sorrow on their faces. One of the princesses of Xing, Mei Chan, was crying next to the armor, and Edward stood behind her. But there was no sadness on his face, desperate determination burned in his eyes. "Forgive me," Mei apologized through tears. "Edward, we have an entrance fee," Ling said, approaching them. "That's not necessary," Ed said quietly. To the surprise of many, a slight smile appeared on his face. "Edward." "Use my life," said Hohenheim, who was led to Edward by his former mentor, Izumi Curtis. "Father. You're an idiot," Ed said, looking into Hohenheim's eyes. Slowly moving away from his brother's remains, Edward began to walk the circle of transformation. He had seen this circle only once, but he remembered it perfectly down to the smallest parts. A ringing silence hung in the air. Edward Elric completed the circle. It was the circle of human transformation. Behold the final transformation of Fullmetal Alchemist. Ed shouted, joining his hands in a clap. He immediately moved them away from each other and directed them towards the alchemical circle under his feet. Edward Elric disappeared in a cluster of electrical discharges, and Alphonse Elric appeared in his place. This was indeed Fullmetal Alchemist's final transformation. Edward stood in the middle of an endless white space. Opposite him was the silhouette of a man. The silhouette was completely white, only one of its legs was normal. "Well? Have you come for your brother?" the creature said with malice in its voice. "And how will you pay? Maybe you can stay instead of him." "No, I have payment," Elric said, pointing his hand behind his back. "Ahahaha, you were the first to offer me the gate, Edward," the creature answered, laughing. "But you don't want to lose your strength, do you?" "Hee, don't answer, I know you don't want to." "Then let's make a contract." "Contract? Which one?" Ed asked uncertainly. "The most ordinary contract with God," he exclaimed with joy in his voice. In the village, hidden by the foliage, it was another warm day. Shinobi were still jumping home, ordinary people were working quietly and peacefully, children were rushing around the village, playing with each other. But there were also elements that stood out from this idyll. More precisely, one element, and his name is Uzumaki Naruto. He was only 7 years old, but already everyone in Konoha shunned him. But why, you probably ask me. Even I could not find the answer to this question. I can only guess. Maybe his extraordinary appearance is to blame for this? Or the hair the color of ripe wheat, which he persistently grows, the scars on his cheeks that strongly resembled the whiskers of a cat or a fox. And also multicolored eyes, one of which was bright blue, and the second was bright yellow, even more likely golden. Pondering this theory, the young man slowly walked towards the library, although many in the village did not like him, but the local librarian did not show obvious signs of aggression. It is quite possible that her blindness was to blame. Naruto was looking for information about Shinobi in the library. Why did he need it? Well, at least because Naruto was a representative of a dying clan and knew it very well. There he looked for the biographies of great shinobi, although they did not contain super techniques, but there were more important points, small details that are usually missed. Take armor, for example. For several generations only one clan in Konoha has been wearing it. Why is this so? Well, firstly, this is the high cost of armor. If armor is needed specifically for shinobi, then it must be possible to strengthen it with chakra, and chakra-conducting metal is very expensive. Secondly, this, oddly enough, is its uselessness, unless, of course, it is made of chakra-conducting metal, since any strong technique can pierce it, and then it depends on what they hit. They melted the armor, so the shinobi will feel on himself that means to plunge into molten metal, hit with the lightning technique and got a fried shinobi. And thirdly, armor simply hinders movement. Naruto extracted all this information from a description of the life of a certain Takashi Yoshiro, a ninja who decided to become a samurai. True, Takashi did not live long, but now Naruto learns from his mistakes. Finally, Naruto reached the public library. In general, there were only 2 libraries in Konoha, public and academic. The building was small and one-story, looking very shabby. They say that there used to be a second building of the library, but it was destroyed during the attack of the nine-tailed demon. Speaking of which, Naruto often heard someone quietly utter the word demon in his direction. The blonde, although small, was not at all stupid. His birthday fell on the day the demon attacked. He was often called a monster, and the boy knew about such personalities as Jinchuriki from books. Even though these books were of an entertaining nature, he got the essence. Casting aside sad thoughts, Naruto, taking a deep breath and praying in his thoughts that the library would be empty, crossed the threshold. The library greeted him with silence and dust. Somewhere in the silence the rustling of pages could be heard. The Uzumaki slowly walked past the librarian, nodding to her in greeting. his eyes already devouring hundreds of shelves of books. Slightly quickening his pace, he began to maneuver among the shelves until his eyes finally caught on something interesting. A tattered white book, on the spine of the book, in a language Naruto couldn't understand, were written intricate words. The hand slowly and carefully took the book from the shelf. There was a rather strange image on the cover. A regular hexagon enclosed in several circles, inside of which there was a triangle of the correct shape, as well as a great many small details that were not immediately noticeable. Such as, a few words written on the edges of some shapes. Peering carefully at the drawing, Naruto tried to understand its purpose. Spitting on it, he opened the book and was even more surprised. It was all in a different language. But Naruto never thought that somewhere in the territory of the 5 elementary countries they spoke something different from the common language. This made him think deeply. Automatically taking the book, he headed to the counter to find out if he could take this book with him. Yes, of course. Only, before, you didn't seem to take anything home, the old librarian said in a creaky voice. So leave me your information. It is necessary? Naruto asked, anticipating the old woman's reaction to his name. Well, yes, the librarian said, handing him a piece of paper and a pen, on which Uzumaki immediately began carefully writing his name. Oh, Uzumaki? She said in surprise, bringing the sheet to her face. Are you, by any chance, Kushina's son? I'm not sure. Naruto was slightly taken aback by such a question. I don't know my parents at all. Oh, that's sad, the old woman said quietly. Naruto was about to ask a question when they were interrupted. Excuse me, can I take this book with me? A girl's voice asked from behind Uzumaki's shoulder. Turning his head, Naruto saw a girl about his age in gray nondescript clothes, who had dark hair gathered in a rather intricate hairstyle, sort of 2 balls of hair at the back of her head. Brown eyes completed the picture. Yes, of course, the old woman immediately turned her attention to the girl, and Naruto could only sigh and quietly go out. The path to the apartment allocated to Naruto had long ago turned into a kind of game, the point of which was to reach the house unnoticed. Although Naruto called it a game, this was necessary training, because a shinobi is a silent killer, or rather, there should be a silent killer, but, looking at the Konoha shinobi, Naruto already began to doubt this, since he was different. The young Uzumaki himself loved flashy colors, such as red and orange, and he wore such colorful things quite often, because it made training more difficult. And now Naruto was trying to get home, blending in with the area. It turned out very badly for him. If ordinary residents sometimes did not notice him, then the shinobi reacted to his attempts only with a slight laugh, only until the moment they did not understand who they met on their way. After this, their gaze changed dramatically, hostility flared up in it. Already halfway to the house, Naruto's own body forced him to change route. Under the rumbling of his hungry stomach, the blonde, no longer hiding, walked to his favorite eatery. He loved to eat well, and here they served the most delicious ramen in the whole world, and it didn't matter that Naruto had only been to Konoha so far. Old man, I'll have double ramen with pork. With such a cry, Uzumaki fell into Ichiraku ramen. It will be now, the local owner Tucci responded cheerfully. Oh, Naruto, what kind of book do you have? Asked the owner's daughter, seeing the book in Uzumaki's hand. Oh, I don't know, I grabbed it from the library to read, Naruto responded carefree. Oh, what is it about? Asked with interest. This question put Uzumaki in a stupor, how to say what she was talking about. If he himself doesn't really know? Various circles again began to pop up in my head, inside of which there were figures and strange writings. The right word popped into my head. Alchemy. It's about alchemy, Uzumaki answered with confidence in his voice. Alchemia, the girl said separately. An unclear word. Have you decided to become a smart guy, Naruto? Pfft, I was already one. Naruto exclaimed, this conversation could have continued further, but the ramen was ready, and the Uzumaki's mind turned off. At the end of the meal, he glanced at the only friendly individuals in all of Konoha. Tucci and his daughter never looked at the boy with contempt or hostility, rather with sympathy and sorrow. Why exactly they treated him this way, Naruto didn't really think about it. Although sometimes he found it quite strange. Finally, having finished the ramen, Uzumaki reached into his pocket to take out the money, but, seeing a negative shake of his head from Tucci, he smiled and, shouting, "Thank you, old man," he again rushed to the house, without having heard the phrase dropped by Iam. "He so looks like a brother, doesn't it, father?" What was the Uzumaki's home like? Naruto himself affectionately called his house a den, but in fact it was only a small apartment located on the outskirts of the city. A large, dilapidated building that housed either umbu, as they were used to Spartan conditions, or orphans, such as Naruto. Slowly climbing the stairs, Uzumaki rolled this incomprehensible word on his tongue. It was something new for him, but at the same time, for some reason, it gave him the feeling that he had already clearly known its meaning a long time ago. Now he is already pushing the front door to his apartment, kicking off his shoes and jumping onto the old bed with a running start. His hands immediately open an incomprehensible book, and his eyes rest on an unknown language. Naruto looked at each letter in the hope of understanding these unusual letters. Soon the idea came to him to make a list of these same letters, an alphabet, so to speak. But in the end, he quickly got bored with it, and he decided to make one of these strange drawings. After running around the room a little, he found a piece of paper and a pencil that had somehow ended up in the closet, and slowly began to draw out the figure. So, what is next? Uzumaki asked himself, and his hands, as if living their own lives, brought their palms together, then spread them and placed them on a small piece of paper. Sparks ran across the palms, and the piece of paper simply disappeared. It was decomposition, Naruto said quietly, and then grabbed his head in pain. Information began to flow into his head in painful jolts. This was knowledge, oddly enough, his knowledge. He definitely remembered that it belonged to him. A girl's face popped into his head. She had long blonde hair, sky blue eyes and several earrings in her ears, and her lips pronounced his name. His name. "Edward," whispered a voice in the boy's head, then he fell into a restless sleep. How does a normal morning start? Well, probably from the ringing of an alarm clock or from the voice of a person close to you who wakes you up. But the morning of one blonde misunderstanding began with obscenities, and in a language that no one in this world had ever heard. Muttering curses under his breath, the odd-eyed young man slowly rose from the floor on which he had spent the night. Stretching until he crunched, the boy slowly wandered to the kitchen in search of food. "Take it, there are just custard noodles here," shouted a youthful voice from the kitchen. With the same unhurried step, the blond man walked towards the thinking room. There he froze in front of the mirror and began to peer very carefully at his own reflection, his fingers fiddling with his golden curls, touching the scars on his cheeks. "And how did you manage to get them?" he muttered, and then, winking at his own reflection, he said, "Well, hello, Uzumaki Naruto." "Cat, report," said the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, tiredly, sitting in his office. The object was spotted on the territory of the public library, in the ramen shop, then went towards the house. The umbu in the cat mask said clearly and without a shadow of emotion. "As ordered, I did not conduct surveillance inside the house. No other observers were found." "I see, was something else going on?" Hiruzen clarified, filling his favorite pipe with selected tobacco. "Ahem," the librarian, Yoshino-san, mentioned Kushina, the masked man answered in the same tone. Well, it's not particularly desirable, but it's not critical," Sarutobi said, taking a drag. Free. Walking slowly through Konoha, Uzumaki Elric reflected on his situation. He experienced a very strange feeling that cannot be expressed in words. He is already living a second life. And judging by the fragments of memory, he can return back to the world in which alchemy rules the roost. There he still has something that he doesn't have here, his family. Well, that means the priority has been set, his goal is to return. I will return, definitely. This is my way, ninja. The young man muttered questioningly under his breath, and then he was filled with laughter. Ahaha, no. Not a ninja, but an alchemist. From that moment on, the young man decided everything that was important to him. For this purpose he will become stronger, he will become what is called a shinobi, for this he will deceive even God. A slight smile began to appear on the blonde's face, and some kind of melody began to come from his lips. Perhaps it's worth visiting the library again, thought Uzumaki and headed in her direction. 1 year later, Konoha. In a short period of time, Uzumaki Elric began to fit into society quite well, began to respond normally to his name, and even made a couple of friends. His first friend was the same girl Naruto met in the library. Her name was Takahashi Tenten, a guy met her in the same library. His other friend was a rather strange guy, dark tousled hair, brown eyes, he answered to the name Sin, although it was more of a nickname that he gave himself after several quarrels with his family. But the most noticeable change in the guy was his clothes. One day, while walking around the city, he couldn't dare call this place a village, he came across a small store and immediately his eyes were literally glued to the window. There, hanging on a mannequin was his dream, a scarlet coat with long sleeves, and he immediately rushed home and scooped up all the cash, leaving only a little for food. Then Naruto did not think that his body would grow and over time the cloak would become too small for him, but still this problem was easily solved, because he had alchemy. Since then, the raincoat has become the main element of his wardrobe. And today the next stage of his life began. Today was admission to the Shinobi Academy. A large crowd of people gathered in front of the academy, but, alas, Naruto did not see any familiar faces, since Shin did not have the makings of a shinobi, and Tenten had already been studying at the academy for a year and was not present at the entrance ceremony. So the third Hokage came out onto a small platform and began to campaign. Uzumaki couldn't call it any other way, it was tons and centners of propaganda, but it's worth emphasizing that Hiruzen was advocating for the protection of their homeland, the country of fire. Ignoring this chatter, Uzumaki Elric decided to draw up a small training plan for himself. The entire previous year had been allotted to him adapting to the world, and now it would be worthwhile to start training. And may the will of fire always abide in your hearts. Naruto caught the end of the address, and also noticed that only non-clan children fell for this, while all the clan's faces did not express anything. So everyone was told to go into the building to go through distribution. The distribution consisted of a pair of tests that showed knowledge of basic skills, such as language and basic mathematics. Also, a pair of ninja doctors, or, more simply, Irenins, approached each participant. They checked the level of chakra in the entrance. And then, based on the results of all the tests, the children were assigned to classes. Naruto ended up in the elite class, along with all the clans and a couple of well-prepared clanless children. Entering the indicated classroom, Uzumaki Elric immediately sat down on the first desk. In his opinion, this was a good place for someone who wants to study, and he considered himself such. A dark-haired young man sat down next to Uzumaki, by all accounts a member of the Uchiha clan. Uzumaki Naruto, the blonde said, extending his hand to his neighbor. Uchiha Sasuke, the dark-haired man answered the handshake after a short pause. At that same second, a pink-haired girl landed in third place at the table and began to slowly eat the Uchiha's brain. She did it with obvious enthusiasm, as if she had been preparing for this all her life. After giving Sasuke a sympathetic look, Naruto turned his gaze to the teacher who had entered the classroom. He was a medium-height, dark-haired man, distinguished by a scar on the bridge of his nose. "Hello, children, my name is Yumino Irika, and I am the curator of your group. I am also a history teacher and a ninjutsu teacher in older courses." The teacher began his speech, then he read out another patriotic text, and only then said the schedule of classes for the coming 6 months. On this note, the first day at the academy ended, all the people began to slowly flow out of the building. The pink-haired girl, in company with several others, surrounded the poor Uchiha, and Naruto decided to help out his desk neighbor. He abruptly wedged himself into the group of girls surrounding the guy, grabbed Sasuke by the forearm and, without slowing down, dragged him along. The Uchiha caught onto his blonde savior's plan and did not resist. Together they ran a couple of blocks and hid in one of the alleys between the many houses of Konoha. "Well, I think we've broken away?" Uzumaki Elric asked, stopping his run. "Well, sort of," the rescued Uchiha answered, as if reluctantly. "And you, I see, are not too talkative?" Naruto asked the question again. In response to this phrase, the Uchiha only snorted. Naruto did not even think of being offended by this, he just waved his hand invitingly and headed in a direction only known to him. The Uchiha did not find anything wrong in following his new acquaintance. The Uzumaki led him along circuitous paths, they passed in the most unexpected places. It was funny, until the moment when the Uchiha noticed that Naruto was walking too quietly, as if he was sneaking. This slightly alerted Sasuke and he began to watch his guide more closely. Clear and smooth movements, they flowed from one to another. Sasuke saw such a gait in his brother, but his brother was an Umbu, and this Uzumaki did not look like a master of stealth. Intrigue took over the mind of the young Uchiha, he already literally felt that Naruto would lead him somewhere interesting. And imagine his disappointment and they came to a small eatery called Ichiraku Ramen. "Hello!" Naruto exclaimed as he entered the room. "Hello, little one." A female voice shouted from somewhere behind the counter. "Hey, who is this here so small that you can't see it from the ground?" Uzumaki shouted to the entire establishment. Well, at least he's fun, the Uchiha thought, and the tips of his lips twitched in a slight smile. With his usual movements, Sarutobi Hiruzen once again filled his favorite pipe with tobacco. On the table in front of him lay several rather weighty folders, all of them containing the adventures of Uzumaki Naruto, all his changes, small and not so small. These folders described everything that happened to the boy over several years. Why did the third gather them in front of him now? He tried to understand where he had gone wrong, what he had overlooked. The guy should have grown up loyal to the village, and if not the village, then to the Hokage, but this young man treated everything with a great deal of skepticism. And yet, all this was not critical for Hiruzen, because this child is first and foremost the son of the fourth, and only then the carrier of the demon. It is a pity that not everyone in the village understood this. Inhaling the tart smoke, Sarutobi opened one of the folders, his eyes slowly began to move through the records. An 8-year-old boy with long braided hair the color of ripe wheat walked slowly down the street. His eyes were closed, and he was whistling a tune under his breath. And not far from him, in the shadows of the houses, one of the Umbu was hiding. Today it was he who was assigned to the demon child. At work, this member of the Secret Service responded to the call sign Suslik, but in the world he was simply June. A native of the Konoha orphanage named after Sarutobi Hiruzen. In general there were only 3 orphanages in the village. In the first there were children who were not capable of becoming shinobi, in the second, a new generation of killers was being raised, and the third, it was he who was organized by the third Hokage. There were everyone, there was no difference whether you were just a child or someone who in the future would become the protector of the village. This was not the first time that Gopher was assigned to watch the Uzumaki, but today the invisible front fighter's eyes caught changes that other people had not noticed. Sometimes the boy uttered words or phrases in a language different from the common one, even his facial expressions changed slightly. If last time the blonde smiled so that it seemed that the smile was about to reach his ears, now on his face there were slightly raised corners of his lips. The gait became more confident. It seemed that the boy was waiting for an attack from any direction. Out of curiosity, Gopher took out a small metal ball from his pocket, it was unknown what he forgot there, and threw it towards the blonde. The guy jumped sharply to the side, landed, made a sharp turn and stared directly at the Sasuke. The Umbu was sure that the guy did not see him, but was looking at the place where the ball came from. It's worth mentioning this in the report, Jun thought then, and he slowly moved to the roof of the house, not far from Uzumaki, who was still examining the area around him to see who had attacked him. Blowing out a stream of smoke, Hiruzen wondered what could have affected the Uzumaki. Fox? This is unlikely, because everyone knows that this demon would have already tried to kill its host if it had made contact with him. And besides, Naruto became more reasonable, began to strive more for knowledge, although before that he also read a lot, but entertaining literature and attempts to find scrolls with techniques are two different things. To the Hokage's surprise, not only did he find a book with techniques, and it was a book, not a scroll, but he also almost learned how to use them. The gopher once again watched the Uzumaki. He could no longer dare to call the boy a demon, he already knew too much about him, he had heard too much. And now, he witnessed another Uzumaki secret. The boy sat on the ground and looked at his own palms. Sometimes one could notice in the morning that he looked with some trepidation at his own arms and legs, as if a moment ago he did not have them. But now his look was different, it was more like anticipation. The guy slowly brought his palms together. As soon as they touched each other, small sparks ran across them, and a blade slowly began to appear from the ground next to the boy. But before he even had time to appear halfway, he immediately crumbled into a pile of ashes. The Uzumaki growled in frustration, jumped up from the ground and slammed his fist into a tree growing nearby. Again, Naruto said in a tired voice, and then sat down on the ground, his palms again beginning their path towards each other. Hiruzen had already been leafing through the surveillance team's reports for several hours and was becoming more and more convinced that Uzumaki was his father's son. A genius hiding from everyone under the mask of a prankster. A good generation is growing, Sarutobi said with a smile on his face. But it's still worth talking to him. Otherwise, his secrecy is slightly exaggerated. Uzumaki was watched not only by the government, but also by other residents of Konoha. A striking example of this is Hinata Hyuga, Naruto's peer, a quiet and shy girl, wears mostly baggy clothes, her dark hair with a bluish tint is always cut in a short bob, and her lavender eyes without a pupil look shyly at the floor. But this cutie has one negative side. She is an experienced stalker. One day, while walking down the street, 7-year-old Hinata was able to somehow escape from her guard. Ask why the girl needs a guard? Well, it was simple, she was the possible heir to the Hyuga clan. And so the princess managed to get caught by hooligans. Everything went very badly. These guys were several years older than Hinata, and the girl herself, although she knew several techniques, did not want to use them. Everything went to its logical end, that is, a beating. After all, hooligans, they were only a couple of years older, so nothing else came to their minds. But literally out of nowhere, at least that's what Hinata thought, he, her hero, appeared. It was Uzumaki Naruto himself. Having heard someone's sobs and threats, he rushed forward, not making out the road, but by some miracle they did not hear his approach. In the girl's eyes, he appeared almost in a halo of mystical light. He had a perfect smile on his face and hatred for the bullies burning in his eyes. But in fact, Naruto recently once again got into a fight and lost. Irritation and anger required a way out, so he rushed to help. There was an angry grin on his face, a bruise was beginning to form under his left eye, and in his head there was only the desire to fight. Even though the boy knew some techniques, it was not enough against 3 opponents. The hooligans took with quantity, and Naruto with scraps of knowledge. While the fight lasted, Hyuga was in prostration. She still could not move away from the image of her hero, which she had invented for herself. She was torn out of her dreamland by the scream of Naruto, whose left arm was broken by one of the bullies. The beating would probably have continued, but Hinata's guard, a representative of the junior branch of the Hyuga clan, suddenly appeared. As soon as the hooligans saw an adult, they ran away, Ko literally threw Hinata over his shoulder and carried him away. And Uzumaki Naruto was left lying on the ground howling from the pain of his broken arm. That day, Hinata violated one of the commandments of a religion unknown to anyone in those places, namely the commandment, "Do not make an idol." It was at that moment that the girl decided to thank her hero, but realized that she simply could not get closer to him. Then she decided to just watch, so that someday she could choose the right moment. And so began her journey as a stalker, although she preferred to call it simply observations. Naturally, her father, the head of the Hayashi clan, found out about Hinata's hobby. But he decided not to do anything, because he was already very disappointed in his eldest daughter, and was going to make his youngest daughter Hanabi the next head of the clan. But Hinata watched Uzumaki with rapture. One day she noticed a change in him. At first this alarmed her, because Naruto was already perfect, why should he change? But then I realized that the changes were for the better. The boy began to devote more time to training, became more collected, and most importantly, he began to notice Hinata. The girl, of course, always knew that she was not a master of disguise, but until that day, Uzumaki had never noticed her. This was the impetus for the girl. She also began training. This, of course, slightly pleased her father, but then upset him even more when he learned that these classes emphasize stealth, not strength. Every evening, coming from training or from observation, Hinata took out from under her pillow a thick, battered notebook with an orange cover and the title, Diary of Observation of Uzumaki Naruto, carefully written in red ink. While the girl was interested in writing, her mind was carried away into the world of fantasy. And her hands wrote something completely different from what was needed. When she returned from the world of dreams and glanced at the notebook, she blushed touchingly, and then fainted with a quiet groan. Morning was slowly coming in Riesenberg. Somewhere a rooster had already notified everyone of the beginning of the morning. Winry Rockbell woke up from his screams. The girl had been living alone for a year. Her grandmother Pinako had died. It happened quietly and even somehow routinely. In those days the grandmother was weak and often asked her granddaughter to do something. And so, when Winry went to pick up a batch of parts for the car armor, she returned to find her grandmother dead. There were no tears, no hysterics, there was only a feeling of emptiness. And a couple of days later there was a funeral. The whole town came to say goodbye to Pinako Rockbell, one of the best mechanics in the city, and just a good friend, and for some, just a drinking buddy, nicknamed the Panther of Riesenberg. Losing loved ones was nothing new for Winry. First her parents, who had gone off as field medics to the Ishvar War and never returned, then the mother of her best friends. Although one of the brothers is alive, he is lost to society. Alphonse plunged headlong into research. Work became the meaning of life for him. Secretly, he hoped to learn the secret of how to bring his brother back to life. He knew one way, but he couldn't afford to stoop to it. And even now, after 5 years had passed since Edward's disappearance, Winry considered what happened to be a disappearance, not a death. His younger brother was still in search. He devoted every minute of his time to alchemy. Every exit from the laboratory was associated with the search for answers, and traveling around the world pursued the same goal. At first, Alphonse tried to maintain communication with everyone, called Winry every evening, maintained an active correspondence with May, even sometimes wrote to Ling, but then he began to move away. Failures made him embittered at everyone, and, first of all, at himself. The younger Elric quarreled with everyone, and among his superiors he only communicated with Mustang, who by that time already confidently ruled the country. And for several years now there has been neither a word nor a breath from him. Maybe he also disappeared? Winry increasingly drove away such thoughts from herself, even though Alphonse no longer communicated with her, but the news of his death would probably have hammered the last nail into the coffin of Rockbell herself. Shaking her head and driving away the sad thoughts that had crept in during the morning, Winry still got up from the table where she had fallen asleep. Above the table, directly to the wall, there were many photographs and drawings, from which one could easily determine the life path of both Winry herself and her friends. Her gaze caught on the last photo, after which she no longer updated this memorial of memory. On it they were all still together. Edward with a happy smile stood next to the huge armor, which Alphonse was at that period of time, and Winry herself. The photographer was then Lisa Hawkeye, and the background of the photo was Roy Mustang sorting papers. A smile crept onto the girl's face, and memories of what it took to take this photo against the backdrop of a Mustang angry at the whole world immediately surfaced in her head. But the smile immediately disappeared as soon as the girl lowered her gaze and looked at the lonely photo lying on the table. The girl still did not dare to hang it on the wall. The photo showed Winry, Alphonse, who had already regained his body, her grandmother Pinocchio, the Elric brothers' mentor Izumi Curtis with her husband Zig, and Van Hohenheim was captured on the side. It seemed as if he was trying to escape from the frame as quickly as possible. Edward was not in this photo, as it was taken after his death. The girl kept looking at the photo, thousands of words and memories flashed through her head, her hand trembled slightly and reached towards the photo, and a moment later a new photo appeared on the memory wall, from the very edge. Rockbell at that moment hoped that there would be further ones, where Edward would appear again. She was distracted from her thoughts by the barking of the elderly dog Dan from the street. The barking seemed happy and even somewhat welcoming. Then there was a knock on the door. "I'm coming." Rockbell immediately shouted and headed towards the door straight in what she was wearing, in oiled work overalls. With every step she was getting closer to the door, her hand was already on the doorknob. The door opened with a slight creak, and the words Winry wanted to say were stuck in her throat. He slowly walked along the streets so familiar from childhood. He remembered every turn and nook, he remembered shortcuts through the expanses of fields. So he passed by the bakery, which prepared the best bread in all of Riesenberg, and then the doors of the tavern, which he passed by, opened. All this evoked nostalgia. But the guy was interested in one specific place. He quietly walked through the town, not noticing the dumbfounded looks of the people. Slowly he walked along the road to the house at the other end of the fields, which could already be seen on the horizon. Every step brought him closer to his cherished goal. He was already literally a couple of meters from the door, when from somewhere behind the house a black and white dog, limping on one leg, flew out with a cheerful bark. The dog received this prosthesis a long time ago, saving a boy and his girlfriend. "Hey, buddy," the guy said quietly, extending his hand towards the door, his fist lightly hitting the wood, painted white. "I'm coming." A muffled voice came from the house. After some moments, the door opened, a girl appeared on the threshold. She was about half a head taller than the guy, her blonde hair was hidden under a bandana. "Hello, Winry," the young man said somehow tiredly, looking at the dumbfounded girl. Morning was slowly coming in Riesenberg. Somewhere a rooster announced the beginning of the morning to everyone. Winry Rockbell woke up from his screams. She woke up sharply, and then jumped in place. In her head there was still an image of Edward, so familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Still the same hair, the color of ripe wheat, braided in a braid, the same height, even the clothes were similar. But one of his eyes was blue, and on each cheek there were 3 scars reminiscent of the whiskers of some animal. "What a strange dream," Winry said quietly and glanced at the memory wall and then at the photo from the funeral. Her hands, as in her sleep, trembled slightly as she attached the photo to the wall. Another morning was coming in Konoha. Everyone was still sleeping. The Umbu Secret Service operatives allowed themselves to slightly close their eyes, after a long night of duty. But their light slumber was immediately disturbed by the awakened object of surveillance. Uzumaki Naruto jumped up on the bed with a wild cry. His face was covered with beads of sweat. And one thought was beating in his head: if only she didn't have a wrench at hand. As soon as sleep released him from its tenacious embrace, the boy realized that he was in his little room overlooking the Hokage Rock, and not in distant Riesenberg. A sad smile immediately crept onto his face. "What a real dream," Naruto muttered quietly under his breath. Uzumaki Elric tried not to fall asleep, the monotonous voice of the teacher literally drove the blonde into the arms of Morpheus. No, don't think that the guy was not interested in studying. He was not interested in this particular subject, as, indeed, in all the subjects of the first year of study. Only rare inserts about chakra theory pulled the boy out of his half-asleep. The blonde was very interested in this topic. He did not understand its principle and how this topic works with alchemy. It was similar to Rentenjutsu and yet very different at the same time. Or maybe it was just the blonde's imagination. After all, he knew nothing about both chakra and Rentenjutsu. But he needed to understand this, because alchemy was failing him. As if something was missing, something that would make alchemy work to its fullest. The analysis worked fine, the decomposition worked even a little faster than in Amestris. Uzumaki Elric cried out, caught a piece of chalk in his forehead. Yumino Irika looked at him, his eyebrows were slightly frowned, and a deceptively kind smile froze on his face. Naruto, tell me, who founded Konoha? Yumino asked, confident in not knowing the answer. Madaroi, Uzumaki answered reluctantly, causing an even bigger grin to appear on Irika's face. That's not true, the teacher said triumphantly, but Elric didn't care, because it was his answer that was correct, and what they teach here is only the history of the victors. Smiling slightly, the blonde again began to listen in half an ear about the great first Hokage, who united many clans around himself. And Sasuke, sitting next to the blonde, was once again convinced of his friend's erudition. A dark-haired boy slowly walked through the streets of Konoha, his brown eyes radiating universal fatigue. The guy's name was Sarutobi Ken. He was a hereditary ninja with one flaw: he did not want to be one. At the age of 6, the boy was seized by another path, science. His parents often told him that they would not let him bury his ninja talent, that it would be the worst sin. Then the guy spat on the floor and said with maximum contempt, "Then I will take this sin upon my soul." And from then on he gave himself the nickname Sin. It was then that he seriously took up experiments, explosions, gas emissions and other obscenities that became commonplace in the territory of the Sarutobi clan in those days. Then it dawned on the boy that he should start with theory. But he simply did not know scientists. With a stretch, Sin could call 2 scientists, the Eternal Loser and the White Snake, but alas, the works of one were banned, and the second simply did not have the habit of writing about her research. And their works were mainly about medicine. Sarutobi was not interested in theory, he wanted to act. He read everything he could get his hands on, but he was still missing something. Until one day in the public library he met someone whom he would later call his master. The boy was sitting at the table and leafing through a book written in an incomprehensible language. "What are you reading?" Sin immediately asked the question, looking in amazement at the letters of another language. "A scientific treatise," his interlocutor answered without raising his head from the book. "And what do they write?" Sarutobi clarified again. "It's about alchemy," the stranger answered with irritation. At that moment, Sin did not yet understand the fate of that meeting. Alchemy seemed like a new jutsu similar to Fuin, but every meeting with the blonde alchemist changed his opinion. Alchemy touched on all aspects of science, united them in itself and made it possible to manipulate matter around according to one rule: if you need something, then you must give something of equal value in return. Sasuke frantically hit the makiwara, the tree cracked, and chips flew off at a frantic speed. Somewhere behind him, sitting on the veranda of a small house, his mother Mikoto. Next to her was the head of the family, and the clan, Fugaku. They watched their son's training. He had never been so passionate about it. Why did he blow himself up like that? Fugaku asked with a slight frown. "Here," Mikoto answered, taking out from somewhere a piece of paper with a pentagram drawn on it. "What's this?" The head of the clan asked in surprise, examining the piece of paper with his Sharingan. There was not even a drop of chakra in it. "This is what Kushina's son used to turn an entire tree into dust with one touch," Mikoto said with a slight smile. Aren't they friends? Fugaku asked with a furrowed brow. Friends are friends, but you understand, the girl said, smiling sweetly. They are still children. His friend has a new toy, but he doesn't have one. So he gets angry. Oh, these children, said the head of the clan, smiling slightly. The couple lovingly watched their youngest son. However, nothing good lasts long. A couple of days later, tragedy awaited the entire Uchiha clan. At night, Uzumaki Elric could not sleep. It seemed to him that his whole body was drowning in blood. Everything was literally saturated with its smell, but the blood itself was nowhere to be found. Obeying strange feelings, the boy crawled out of bed as secretly as possible and snuck out into the street in exactly what he was wearing. Slapping his bare feet on the cold ground, the blond man, with waist-length hair and funny pants with painted cats, walked to where his intuition was calling him in an ominous whisper. A scream cut through the silence of the night. From somewhere around the bend a dark-haired girl of about 13 flew out. A Sharingan with 2 tomo was burning in her eyes with a scarlet light. She was dragging a girl of about 7 by the hand. Her face expressed nothing, and her black hair was covered in blood. Before Naruto had time to utter a word, the eldest's head flew off his shoulders, while the younger one did not even have time to flinch, falling to the ground like a broken doll. Tworer, Uzumaki Elric literally growled. He could tolerate a lot. Fortunately the local mentality had already influenced him, but the blonde would not tolerate the killing of children. The palms came together with a slight clap, and a small thorn flew out of the ground, which was immediately repulsed by the faceless sword. It was as if magma was running through Uzumaki Elric's veins. The scars on his cheeks began to stand out even more on his pale face. The pupils of his eyes became cat-like. The greatest of the bijou, Kyubi no Yoko, as usual Kurama, whose eyes reluctantly opened, the hatred of his current body was felt on the periphery of consciousness. Poisonous red chakra immediately flowed outside the cage, imbuing the jailer's chakra circulation system with demonic power. The demon was about to start whispering to the vessel filled with malice, kill, eat, hate. How the eyes of the nine-tailed fox saw the space behind the cage. There, on a small stone eminence, there were gates. All of them were covered with strange engravings and they reeked of power. And then the demon fell into a stupor for a moment. The gates began to open. Hundreds of hands made of darkness burst through a small gap, until finally one white hand appeared. Then the thing itself came out. An abstract silhouette of a man, literally breathing power, turned his head without eyes towards the fox's muzzle. A smile immediately appeared on his head. The finger of his left hand, as if laughing, threatened the demon. Then the silhouette was pulled inside the gate by the same black hands. Well, Kurama said in surprise. I'd better sleep some more. The demon fell asleep, leaving the demonic chakra he released to the discretion of his jailer. An umbu with the funny call sign Sasuke was assigned to spy on the Uzumaki that night. Everything seemed to be as usual, but the elite ninja managed to miss his charge. And only a wave of demonic bloodlust showed him the path to his goal. There, on the street, the demon child was fighting with a member of the root. The blonde was covered all over with scarlet chakra, from which 2 tails were also made, fluttering behind his back. Judging by the stance, he was covering the girl lying behind him. Here 2 tails took the shape of hands, and repeated the blonde's gesture. 2 palms of demonic chakra collided in a light clap, and a growl escaped from the blonde's mouth. Light discharges of lightning passed throughout the entire area around, then the entire area began to crumble into dust, at the same second turning into thousands of spears that rushed towards the faceless one. Gopher said quietly, thinking about what they would tell him when he wrote his report. Ahem, Sarutobi choked on smoke, listening to another report. So, out of all the Uchihas, only 3 are alive? Yes, the fighter in the mouse mask reported briefly. And who was it? Hiruzen asked annoyed. Root, another umbu in a gopher mask suddenly spoke up. What? The 3rd Hokage's pipe fell onto the table with a loud thud. Firstly, how do you know this, and secondly, where are the bodies? I was watching the object, Sasuke answered, scratching the back of his head. And I lost visual contact with him in the middle of the night. What the hell, the third wanted to be indignant. But I immediately felt a surge of demonic chakra. The Hokage, an Umbu fighter, abruptly interrupted. Arriving at the source, I saw how an object, under the influence of demonic chakra, was forcing one of the root fighters with spears created by one of his techniques. He protected a girl from the Uchiha, there was another one nearby, dead, and I sealed Kornavik's body in a scroll. Danzo won't get away with it this time, Hiruzen said with an evil grin on his face. You've played too much, old friend. What about Uzumaki? The third asked, already worried. What's going to happen to him, said Sasuke, again scratching the back of his head. He finished off the route, rushed to the Uchiha quarter, fell face first into the ground halfway, lost consciousness, and is now in the hospital. Last night, the life of one little girl fell into the abyss in a couple of moments. Even during the day, Ayumi talked cheerfully with her sister, waiting for their father to arrive from a long mission, and in the evening she contemplated a puddle of blood in her own house. What she saw on the floor was difficult to call her father. A normal child would cry and run away, but Ayumi was trained to be a ninja from the moment she became aware of herself. The father's body caused only sadness and emptiness. The feeling was like hunger. A pulling feeling somewhere in the area of the heart. While Ayumi was in a stupor, her sister quickly grabbed the girl by the hand and rushed away from the clan territory. Ayumi did not understand where and why her sister was taking her, she did not even hear the words that she said in an attempt to bring her sister to her senses. She only remembered the whistle of the blade and her older sister's head flying off her shoulders. Having lost the warmth in her palm, the unconscious Ayumi fell to the cold ground. Out of the corner of her eye she saw an Umbu fighter, only there were no distinctive on his mask. He raised his blade over her. There was no fear, there was only sadness. A moment later, a wave of fear rolled over the girl, but it was caused by the wrong fighter. Tworer, a roar was heard somewhere behind her, and a second later Ayumi saw the boy right in front of her. Everyone in Konoha knew who it was. Civilians called the guy a demon and only experienced ninjas knew that this was a simple boy forced to be the weapon of the village. A wave of wild fear flooded Ayumi's consciousness, her body still did not obey her, and in the end the girl lost consciousness. Next day, noon. Sin rushed to the hospital at full speed. Out of the corner of his ear, he heard that the demon's vessel had gotten there. This conversation was heard on the clan's territory, so it made sense to believe him. Running to the hospital was easy, but finding Uzumaki there was more difficult. All the doctors were running back and forth, because the working day had already begun. Attempts to find out in which ward the boy was lying only led to, "Get out of here, don't bother me working." The situation was saved by the unexpected appearance of an Umbu wearing a dog mask. The 32nd ward, the second building, just for a little while, the Umbu said, placing his hand on Sina's shoulder, and then disappeared into the shunshin. "Thank you," Sin muttered quietly and rushed in the indicated direction. The room, surprisingly, was single. A dark-haired girl was sitting on a chair in the corner of the room. She gazed blankly at the wall and sometimes glanced sideways towards the bed where Uzumaki was lying. He was all wrapped in bandages, only his mouth and eyes were open. Slowly, Sin walked up to his friend and was about to say something, when suddenly he was ahead of him. "Oh, hi, Shin," Naruto said hoarsely, opening one eye. "Two questions," Sin said, frowning. "How did you manage? And tell Tenten about this?" "Secret information," Uzumaki said abruptly. "And you can tell Ten, although I don't think she'll come, she's got school and everything else to do." "I see," Sin said tiredly, his hands were already taking out a book with a white cover from his bosom. "I actually wanted to clarify something. Sin, don't you see? I feel pretty bad here, Uzumaki said quietly, closing his eyes. Okay, the guy agreed as if reluctantly. Nevertheless, he just came to visit his friend, and the questions about alchemy were only secondary. Then another person entered the room. He was wearing an umbu uniform and a gopher mask. Well, you've done a lot of things, little demon, the umbu drawled wearily. Hello to you too, Naruto answered, still without opening his eyes. Well, I'll go, said Sin, realizing that he didn't belong here and immediately walked away with a quick gait. As I understand it, this was an action against the entire clan? Opening one eye, Uzumaki asked gloomily. Yes, said the umbu and walked slowly to the windowsill. There are 3 survivors. Uchiha Sasuke, Uchiha Yumi, and also Uchiha Izao, but the latter is now in the state of a vegetable. Crap news, Naruto said tiredly, he simply didn't have the strength to be angry. And also, since I failed the surveillance, they demoted me in rank and assigned me another task, said the umbu, taking off his mask. From this day on, I am your personal teacher. You can call me Jun or just mentor. Doesn't look like a demotion, the blonde answered thoughtfully. It's easier to observe, sit and don't glare, Jun said tiredly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. And now I'll teach you something. He had a nightmare, the whole world was painted in scarlet tones. Bare feet walked slowly on the cold wooden floor. He tried not to pay attention to the squelching sound of his own steps and not to look down. The entire floor was covered in blood, body parts lay here and there. Swallowing the lump that had risen in his throat, the guy somehow hobbled to his parents' room. Father. Mom, the boy said quietly, looking at the corpses of his own parents. Who did it? His older brother came out from the shadows of the room. Brother, the boy said in confusion, anger began to awaken in his chest. He was about to say something else, but a demonic roar reached his ears. The dream ended abruptly. Uchiha Sasuke cried, waking up in his room. The demonic roar was still heard in his head, and his brother's emotionless face stood before his eyes. He definitely couldn't do it alone, Sasuke said hoarsely. Although he believed that his brother was strong, he simply could not cut out everyone he saw. That roar, that creature probably helped him. I will kill them both. He woke up. There was a scream from a nurse who flew into the room, a doctor immediately flew after her, and an umbu appeared in the corner of the room. Finally, when everyone had left his room, the relatively small Uchiha was still sitting on the chair. Uzumaki Elric decided to look under the bandages. Slowly, turn by turn, he freed one of his hands. Burnt flesh appeared under the bandages, skin was missing from the arm up to the elbow. Why don't I feel pain? Then a terrible guess came to his head, and with hasty movements he began to tear off the bandage from his head. Fu, the blonde breathed out with relief, realizing that his hair was still with him. The head suffered the least damage, only a few burns on the face. In particular, one part of the famous mustache was no longer there, in its place was an uneven oval of a wound. You can live, Uzumaki said quietly, busy feeling his head. He missed the moment the little Uchiha approached him. I owe you my life, Uzumaki Dano, a quiet voice came from her. I have only problems on my head, Naruto thought wearily, looking into her emotionless eyes. It was a rather controversial day in the village hidden in the leaf, although few knew about it. On the one hand, there was mourning after the massacre in the Uchiha clan, and on the other hand, it was the day of Danzo's removal from the post of head of the Umbu root. Few knew about the second. For everyone, except those who knew the second moment of this day, there was mourning. Most of the residents and all the ninja gathered at the cemetery to hear the Kage's speech and say goodbye to the almost completely destroyed Konoha clan. There were those who openly showed their feelings. There were those who simply stood quietly, and there were 3 children who were a little further away. Uzumaki Naruto stood leaning on someone's tombstone and looking gloomily in the direction of the third, rubbing his bandaged left hand, the burns on which everyone did not want to go away. Somewhere in the cemetery Uchiha Yumi slowly walked, her gaze searched for the blonde figure of her savior in the crowd, but, alas, the girl had no idea that the guy was behind her. Uchiha Sasuke sat with a frown under one of the trees. He could not muster the strength to go to the graves. Something similar reigned in the souls of all three. One was angry with his brother, the other was angry with himself, and the third simply did not allow anger, as well as her other feelings, to break out at everyone. There was a deafening silence when people saw Naruto slowly walking towards the graves, still deciding to say goodbye to those whom he essentially did not know and could not save. Ayumi minced behind him. She nevertheless looked for the figure of her savior from the crowd. Sasuke, seeing these two, growled irritably, and with the thought, "Am I worse than them?" went to the graves. The Hokage stopped his speech for a moment, allowing the children to approach. There was a quiet clap of Uzumaki's palms. On the ground next to him a flower slowly grew, a small white lily. Then Ayumi came up and, with a magician's gesture, took out exactly the same one from somewhere in the folds of her clothing. Sasuke was the last to lay a flower on the grave. Unlike the others, he carried the flower in his hands all the way. While still sitting under the tree, he held it in his hands. As you can see, not all members of this clan died. Kage's voice rang out behind the departing children. And for this we should thank Uzumaki Naruto. He suffered greatly while saving one of the Uchihas. Sasuke already wanted to shout out, what he thought about the Hokage, and about the situation in general. He was infuriated by this funeral, because it was not correct. All the bodies found were burned, and in this cemetery there was just a monument. Mass grave without bodies. This was wrong. The Uzumaki's palm fell on Sasuke's shoulder. The blonde's face was unusually gloomy. The same irritation was visible on it as on Sasuke's face. "You can put your thanks in," Naruto himself began to say, without turning to face the Hokage, but stopped short when he felt someone's palm gently squeeze his hand. The little Uchiha with the same indifferent face stood nearby, holding the blonde's hand. "Let's go." "I don't want to be here," Sasuke said irritably and walked forward, followed by Naruto and Ayumi. At a slow pace, the trio of children simply walked forward. None of them knew where to go, but no one was definitely going to go towards the Uchiha quarter. And so, the end of the journey for this trio was Uzumaki's apartment. Although there was little space in it, the three of them had a place to stay. Walking into the kitchen, the children sat around the rickety table and were silent until there was a knock on the door. "It's your house, you open it," the Uchiha said irritably, glancing at Naruto. "Maybe I?" Ayumi asked, but Uzumaki Elric had already walked towards the door. Behind her was Hinata, as red as a lobster as usual. She held out a small package towards the blonde. Nodding slightly, Naruto took the package in his hands, then raised an eyebrow in silent question. The girl understood him correctly and, without uttering a sound, walked into the kitchen. Uchiha Sasuke somewhat reluctantly opened his eyes. He felt too good. My body felt pleasantly warm, a cool wind blew across my face, and birdsong could be heard somewhere nearby. And then it dawned on the Uchiha that something was wrong here. Sitting up abruptly and opening his eyes, he saw the Konoha Park around him. He himself was in a small hammock stretched between two trees. What gave him warmth was a bright orange jacket. Not far from Sasuke, Uzumaki lay on the ground wearing only dark shorts and sandals. His torso was still wrapped in bandages, as was his left arm. "Hey, Uzumaki," the Uchiha said irritably, getting to his feet. "Why am I covered with your jacket?" "She's yours, actually," Naruto drawled from the ground without opening his eyes. "I lost it to you at cards." "What?" Sasuke raised his eyebrows in disbelief. "You said she was cool," Naruto responded cheerfully from the ground. "True, you wanted the same one, only red, but still." "And what?" "I don't remember anything," the Uchiha clarified, frowning. Hinata decided to get us drunk, Uzumaki said calmly, still lying on the grass. We drank? Sasuke clarified in disbelief. I drank, and they got you drunk, Naruto answered. Uzumaki, we are 11, Sasuke said gloomily. I'm Uzumaki, I can drink poison, and in the morning I'll just have a stomach ache, the blonde said. And they had to drug you so that you could speak out, otherwise you'd go crazy. Just remember, this was the only time, the Uchiha said gloomily. You'll tell me this after your first serious mission, the blonde answered, rising from the ground. Where are Hinata and Ayumi? Sasuke decided to ask anyway. Hinata went home, and the little one is sleeping at my house, Naruto answered, stopped abruptly and turned back. Standing in the shade of the trees was a man in jounin clothes with dark short hair and brown eyes. He waved his hand at Naruto and a sadistic smile appeared on his face. Who is this? Asked the Uchiha. This is my mentor, Naruto answered with a slight smile. The key to my apartment is in the inside pocket of your jacket. Why do I need him? Sasuke asked the blonde man's back with a frown as he walked towards his mentor. Why do I need a small Uchiha in my bed? Continuing the path to the mentor, the blonde responded with a question to the question, and then disappeared along with the jounin in the shunshin. My legs were throbbing mercilessly, my left arm felt like a piece of torn flesh. The body continued to automatically try to dodge the blows. Another attack from the mentor made the boy fall to the ground. Pretty good, but not for a ninja, said the once most frequent observer of the demon. Try to circulate chakra throughout your body. Are you kidding me? The blonde's voice rang out. The way they explain the essence of chakra to us at the academy doesn't help at all. I think you're kidding me, June responded. You were already given the theory, you should feel chakra. But how to let it go through the body? Naruto spat. You must feel the source, then imagine how the energy from the source slowly passes through, say, your hand, the mentor responded. I'll try, Uzumaki Elric said irritably, closing his eyes in an attempt to concentrate and cut off the feeling of pain. Dressed in a well-worn t-shirt and shorts, Sasuke was cleaning his house. Fortunately, he knew a lot and could even cook normal food for himself, and who would clean up? Shouldn't a 7-year-old child be forced to clean up blood from the floor? Sasuke developed a very strange relationship with Ayumi in a couple of days. Before this whole disaster, he didn't even know her, although she most likely knew him. How can you not know one of the sons of the head of the clan? By hook or by crook, he pulled the girl out of Uzumaki's apartment and literally forced her to move into the house in which Sasuke himself lived. Now she was in the already cleaned kitchen and preparing dinner, which the brunette could have cooked himself, but the girl also needed to be occupied with something. The boy himself felt, although bad, but not as bad as at the moment of awakening. Still, he still has friends, and there are family members too. He had been dreaming of a little sister for a long time. There was also Izao, who was lying in a coma, and Sasuke also visited him to at least find out what he looked like. Finally, having cleaned the corridor, the Uchiha caught the delicious smells from the kitchen. Going there he found Ayumi, who had put on a red jacket. The jacket was clearly too big for her. This is my jacket, Sasuke said quietly. Sorry, Sasuke-sama, the girl whispered, taking off her jacket. Either just Sasuke, or brother, the brunette said quietly. Sitting down at the table. Sit down to dinner. Yes, brother, the girl answered, and for the first time since meeting her, Sasuke saw the corners of her lips twitch into a slight smile. Haruno Sakura has not seen the person to whom she decided to give her heart for several days. She, of course, knew about the almost complete extermination of the Uchiha, but it was also known that 3 of them were alive, including Sasuke. Next to Haruno sat her best friend and, at the same time, rival Yamanaka Ino. The blonde literally put her face on the desk, half bored and looking hopefully at the door. Do you think he will come? Ino asked quietly. He'll show up someday anyway, Sakura said. But I think it's better not to touch him. He's usually quite irritated, it's hard to imagine what will happen now. As soon as she finished speaking, the door opened and Uzumaki Naruto entered the classroom. His blonde hair was noticeably shorter and was no longer tied in a braid, but simply loose. There was a burn mark on one cheek. Instead of the usual red cloak or orange jacket, there was a black t-shirt with a white spiral on his chest, and his left arm was wrapped in bandages up to his shoulder. Following him, Sasuke Uchiha stepped into the classroom, wearing the orange jacket that an Uzumaki usually wore and black pants, complete with the usual black ninja sandals. His hair was disheveled and he had a black eye under his left eye. "Hello, people," said Naruto surprisingly gloomily. "Hello," Sasuke said unexpectedly. Usually he didn't say anything at all except tch. There was silence in the audience. Everyone was surprised by such changes in people they had known for a long time. Kakashi Hatake slowly walked through the village, his eyes raptly looking at the lines of the book. From the outside it seemed to everyone that it was always the same book, but this was only a slight illusion. Every time Kakashi read something new, and sometimes, when he was free from missions and was in a good mood, he wrote it himself. True, his stories were popular mainly among ninjas, since Hatake showed everyone the world without embellishment. The ash-haired man began writing after the death of his comrade Obito. Then he was just trying to distract himself by writing down his thoughts on paper, but one day Rin found them. That day, the girl came to Kakashi's house in another attempt to pull her friend out of a prolonged depression. Entering the living room, she saw a low table littered with papers, which were covered with neat columns of text. Looking around and not finding her teammate, Rin tiptoed, as if afraid to break the silence, made her way to the table and looked at a sheet with a neat number 1 in the corner. In silence, the girl began to read. It seemed only a moment had passed, and the text had already ended. But during these moments, Rin became so attached to the characters, so imbued with the atmosphere, that she involuntarily shed a tear when the main character died on the battlefield, covering his comrade. It was in this state that Kakashi found her, who managed to fall asleep on a bench in the park after working on the text all night. "Rin, is everything okay?" Kakashi asked worriedly, approaching the girl and seeing tears running down her cheeks. "What is it called?" the girl asked, raising her eyes from the text to her friend's face. "It has no name," Hatake answered. "Just like the hero has no name." "You must let her out," the girl said quietly. This was the first and last book Rin read by Kakashi. On the next mission, Rin died. But Hatake still published that book, in a nondescript white cover without any drawings, just a red drop in the middle. They never gave it a name. This story started from the very first page, no prefaces, tables of contents, etc., only at the very end there was a signature in red Inu hieroglyphs. "How long has it been, Rin?" Kakashi quietly whispered to himself as he looked at the cloudless sky over Konoha. Under his mask he smiled at his thoughts. And then he turned his gaze to the sun and, quietly exhaling, headed towards the academy. Today he had to receive his team, and he was already late. Finally reaching the academy and finding the audience, he put the book in his pocket and entered. There he saw three. The first, blonde with long hair gathered in a braid, dressed in a blood-red cloak. On his left hand there was a white glove, and instead of standard ninja sandals there were massive boots. His eyes of different colors looked at the world with amusement. The second, a gloomy brunette in a goggle-eyed orange jacket and dark pants. The third was a girl with pink hair. She looked at the brunette with adoration. All three had playing cards in their hands. "We're opening up," the blonde says with a chuckle. "A couple," says the pink-haired one, showing the cards. "Street," the brunette says as if reluctantly. "Straight flush," the blonde says with a smile. "Schuler," the girl says annoyed. "It's not the thief who hasn't been caught," the brunette defends the blonde. Hello," Kakashi decided to intervene. "Will you be fourth?" The brunette suddenly asks. No, I'm Hatake Kakashi, your mentor, says the ash-haired man. Let's go to the roof, it's stuffy here. Walking onto the roof, the children sat down on a bench, and Hatake stood opposite them. Well, let's start with the introduction, name, hobbies, goals, etc., says Kakashi. Will you set an example? Said the pink-haired girl. Hatake Kakashi, my interests don't concern you, just like my goals, and you won't like my hobbies, Kakashi says with a slight smile invisible under the mask. Your turn, the jounin says, nodding at the girl. Sakura Haruno, I love. Ahem, the girl says, blushing a little. Sasuke, the Uchiha frowns at this. Interests. Medicine, probably goals, blushing again. They don't concern you, but I don't like Uzumaki. Uchiha Sasuke, the brunette begins after Haruno. I love training, family and tomatoes. I have 2 goals, protecting my family and killing my 2 enemies. I don't like annoying people. Uzumaki Naruto, the blonde begins with a smile. Hobbies are alchemy, I love training and bright colors. Goals have absolutely nothing to do with you, and I don't like wrenches. And when someone calls him petty, the Uchiha says quietly. Who is this here so small that you can't see it from the ground? Uzumaki, who was only a couple of centimeters shorter than Sasuke, immediately explodes with indignation. Sarutobi Hiruzen read the documents provided to him with interest. These were designs, incomprehensible seals, circles, pentagrams. All this was brought to him by one of his clanmates, or more precisely, by the boy Ken, better known as Sin. He learned from Uzumaki incomprehensible techniques. According to both of them, these are not techniques, but a whole science. A few years ago, these two provided the Hokage with a brief summary of alchemy. But alas, it was impossible to teach everyone such a useful thing. According to Uzumaki, for this you need to have some kind of gate, but not everyone has one. But still Ken was able to learn. First, the boy with a sparkle in his eyes showed the simplest technique. He analyzed a piece of metal. All impurities were determined to the nearest percentage. But this was already very, very useful. Then there was decomposition, the ability to destroy objects at the molecular level. Fortunately, they didn't break through strong barriers, otherwise they would have had to do something about all this. But the light barriers scattered all at once along with the things they protected. The next stage was not shown in full, but even some of its aspects were impressive. Manipulation of the world, creation. With sufficient strength and desire, Uzumaki could repeat Mokuton techniques, or he could release an incredible amount of piercing weapons out of nowhere. But everything had its price. If you have done something, you must give something in return. Crumbs of metal from the ground went into the blades, and the earth around them went into the earthen pillars. In general, it was necessary to give something of equal value. But even its individual aspects were impressive. Manipulation of the world, creation. With sufficient strength and desire, Uzumaki could repeat Mokuton techniques. Or he could release an incredible amount of piercing weapons out of nowhere. But everything had its price. If you have done something, you must give something in return. Crumbs of metal from the ground went into the blades, and the earth around them went into the earthen pillars. In general, it was necessary to give something of equal value. But even its individual aspects were impressive. Manipulation of the world, creation. With sufficient strength and desire, Uzumaki could repeat Mokuton techniques, or he could release an incredible amount of piercing weapons out of nowhere. But everything had its price. If you have done something, you must give something in return. Crumbs of metal from the ground went into the blades, and the earth around them went into the earthen pillars. In general, it was necessary to give something of equal value. The new generation will be incredible, Hiruzen says quietly with a fatherly smile on his lips. One day, Uchiha Izeo's life collapsed. he couldn't even understand what hit him. He lay in a coma for almost a year, and the first thing he learned was that there were only 3 left from the entire clan, including him. That same day, 2 people came to his room. A girl unknown to him and the son of the head of the clan. Outwardly they did not express any emotions, but for a second the girl's lips twitched into a smile. "You slept for a long time, Izao," said Fugaku's son. "But it's okay, as soon as you're released from here we'll need to talk." "I'm useless," Izao said gloomily in response. The doctors told him one more thing: he was paralyzed. "I will never be able to walk." "Nonsense," the boy said sharply. "You are not useless, you are a member of the Uchiha clan, and no matter what ailments you have, you will remain so, and we will take care of you." Then these words somewhat shocked Izao, but a little later, when the man was discharged, Sasuke himself came for him, and then drove him in a wheelchair across all of Konoha to the Uchiha quarter. The strangest thing is that he brought him to the house of the head of the clan, where the girl also ended up. "Welcome home, brother," that's how the girl greeted Sasuke. This surprised Izao, because he knew that Fugaku only had 2 sons. "There are too few of us left to make any distinction," said Sasuke, seeing Izao's surprise. "So we're all family." A lot of time has passed since then. Izao got used to the always gloomy Sasuke, the little emotional Ayumi, even the hectic and sometimes incredibly mature Uzumaki, and the quiet and always blushing Hinata. "Finally I found my path, which turned out to be far from ninja affairs." He turned out to be a good artist. Now his paintings decorated all the walls of the house. He painted everyone and everything, capturing every moment in the lives of his family and their friends. Every change was visible in the paintings. One day when Izao would be quite old, then, probably, he will arrange his own exhibition. And its name will be, Through the Years. Drowsiness overcame the girl, her stomach rumbled pitifully, demanding food. The girl herself settled down under the shade of one of the trees on one of Konoha's many training grounds. In order to somehow distract herself from the state of her body, she turned her gaze to her fellow sufferers and part-time members of the squad. A shiver ran through the girl's body for a second. This always happened when she remembered that she herself had signed up to become a killer. But her blind love led the pink-haired girl after her chosen one, who was one of the hereditary ninjas. Uchiha Sasuke attracted her with an aura of mystery in his eternal detachment. It would seem, what's wrong? But the girl spent all of herself to achieve at least some kind of reaction, and at least another, TCH or PF. This brought her some kind of perverse sense of satisfaction, because he still noticed her. As for Sasuke's eternal companion, Sakura didn't love him. Loud, annoying, and what infuriated the girl even more, he knew more than her. Even though at times his statements seemed absurd and went against accepted norms, in the end, after sifting through mountains of literature, the girl found out that Uzumaki was right. Sakura hated the blonde for this. But this was also something for which she was sometimes ready to thank him tearfully. He could sometimes literally revive the Uchiha. In front of him, Sasuke not only spoke, albeit with a tinge of irritation and too sparingly, he expressed emotions, and this was not his usual irritation. In those days when Sasuke lost his family, it was in the crazy blonde that he found support. It was then that he began to change. His eternal dark blue t-shirt with the Uchiha clan's Kamen was replaced by the orange jacket that used to belong to the Uzumaki. And, lo and behold, Sasuke began to speak not only with Uzumaki, albeit in monosyllables, but still at least something. Over time, the ever-lent expression on his face gave way to a caustic grin. The sentences became longer, more sarcastic, and sometimes with a certain shade of, albeit black, humor. Uzumaki himself, albeit unnoticed by many, but not by Sakura, was changing. More and more often his face became serious. Sometimes he buried himself headlong in scrolls and books that he alone understood, muttering words to himself in an unknown language. He began to win all sparrings, using techniques that were not included in standard Konoha taijutsu. Elbow strikes, grabs, sometimes even just mean tricks. "We will be watchdogs, and we will need everything to survive," Naruto sometimes said when someone doubted the value of the knowledge they were given. And also his eyes. They sometimes frightened the pink-haired one. It seemed that these two multicolored eyes had seen much more than what a child could never see before, who had never left the village. But what scared Sakura more was what was happening right now. Sasuke, in the company of Uzumaki, armed with small shovels, ran around the training ground and buried the explosion of seals that the Uchiha had brought with him in large quantities. On the ground in front of the girl lay a scroll with a schematic depiction of a training ground. Sasuke drew it, running the length and breadth of the entire training ground a couple of times. Then the plan was divided by Uzumaki into squares. Half an hour later the notes, minefields, were added, and now these two were actually engaged in mining. And with some special zeal, as if their lives depended on it. Maybe they took the sensei's words too literally. Sakura thought, watching as another piece of paper with a fuin seal lay under a thin layer of turf. He really can't arrange such a terrible training. "How can I eat?" the girl said quietly when her stomach made another request for at least a light breakfast. "And the mentor is late." Wow, Hatake thought, looking at his team, which was trying to prepare for the exam. Two were pushing a seal explosion around the entire test site, and the third was intently looking at the map of the area with the detonation zones marked there. All three were surprisingly concentrated, although Sakura's face sometimes showed irritation mixed with misunderstanding, while on the boys' faces, in contrast, sometimes a certain expectation arose, as if something interesting was about to happen. "Well, let them get ready, I won't interfere," Kakashi thought, smiling slightly under his mask, sitting on a tree branch not far from his students. Uzumaki Elric looked intently at his mentor. Hatake appeared around noon, or more precisely, about 30 minutes before 12 o'clock. Hatake Kakashi, living up to his reputation, Naruto ran around half the village last night, learning from those few people who did not shy away from him the crumbs of information about the Trouble Man. This was one of the nicknames of their new mentor. Naruto didn't learn anything useful, only 2 nicknames, and about the reputation of the most unpunctual ninja in the entire land of fire, if not the entire continent. "Okay," Kakashi said reluctantly. "You have until noon, and your task is to take this from me." Just as sluggishly and lazily, the Jounin took out 2 bells from one of the pockets of his green vest. "But there are only 2 of them?" Sakura said in surprise. The Uchiha responded with his unforgettable "PF." And Uzumaki Elric himself only pulled the protector off his forehead and wrapped it around his fist, so that upon impact he would leave behind a mark in the form of Konoha symbols. "Whoever cannot take it away will be tied to a post." Here Hatake made a dramatic pause. "And we'll watch how the other 2 have dinner. And yes, you can use anything to win. You can even try to kill me." "Sasuke, smoke," Naruto said sharply. The Uchiha threw 2 small balls at his feet and immediately the clearing was filled with smoke. Naruto and Sasuke immediately rushed into the bushes literally by the hand, dragging Sakura with them. "But I didn't even say, start," Kakashi said with some sadness in his voice. The kids hid in the nearby bushes. Kakashi, of course, knew this. It's not for nothing that he is an experienced Jounin, and his hearing and sense of smell are very heightened, so one could say that he sensed his students. Square 7-4, Naruto's voice reached Hatake's ears, and immediately kunai flew out of the bushes, followed by a fireball. Uzumaki himself flanked the enemy, but he was not going to attack end to end. A quiet "cats" escaped his lips, and the ground under the Jounin blossomed like a fiery flower. With a quiet bang, Hatake's shadow clone collapsed, and the mentor himself emerged from the other side of the clearing. "It's quite good, but not enough," Kakashi said lazily. Sector 7-5, Naruto mouthed. Sasuke understood him perfectly and already rushed towards his mentor. He tried to force him into close combat. Naturally, although the Uchiha was a genius, he could not stand up to a jounin alone, so having received a couple of significant blows, he immediately switched with the Uzumaki. They took turns trying to break through the sensei's defenses, until finally Naruto smiled sharply. The protector of the leaf settlement, still wound around the fist, began to glow slightly blue. It was not for nothing that it was made of chakra-conducting steel. Naruto's fist slammed into the ground below him, the release of chakra causing the ground to crack, pieces of it flying in all directions, with a small explosion seal visible on every second one. A quiet "cats" was heard behind Hatake, and the Uzumaki and Uchiha were already jumping to the side. "Do you think we did it?" Sakura's quiet voice came from the other end of the dust cloud raised by the explosion. "No," Naruto answered shortly. "And what difference does it make?" the Uchiha muttered tiredly, looking at the disk of the sun, which had just entered its zenith. "Time is over." Quiet applause came from the cloud of dust. "You showed yourself quite well," Kakashi's voice rang out. "Sasuke's ninjutsu is above average, Naruto's has the beginnings of his own taijutsu style, well, but Sakura didn't show anything sensible, so." A moment later, Sakura was in Hataki's arms, and then he and her quickly walked to one of the wooden pillars for practicing strikes. The rope literally appeared out of nowhere in his hands. "You two are eating," Hatake said, tying the girl to a pole. "And she's looking." Two bento boxes lay on the ground not far from Sakura. Her stomach made a sad song at the sight of still unopened food containers. "I'll leave for now," the jounin said and disappeared into the shunshin. "Does he think we're stupid?" Sasuke asked quietly, picking up the bento. "Well, maybe we're just too smart by his standards," Naruto said, taking the second box in his hands. "What are you talking about anyway?" Sakura asked quietly, trying to turn her head to the side so as not to see such alluring food. "Yes," said Naruto, approaching her closely. A kunai flew from the Uchiha side, cutting the ropes, and the girl was freed from captivity. "What?" Haruno said in surprise, looking at the bento handed to her. "I'm not hungry yet," the blonde answered with a smile. "And besides, you're part of our team, so get some food." As soon as the girl took the box in her hands, Hatake immediately appeared in the clearing. His face, even though it was hidden under a mask, was distorted by a grimace of anger. "You," Hatake said in a threatening tone, and then the anger disappeared and complete indifference returned. "We've passed." "What?" Sakura asked again in surprise. "Team," said the Uchiha. "Work," Uzumaki finished for his friend. When did you understand?" Kakashi clarified, taking out a book with a bright orange cover from his kunai pouch. "From the very beginning," Sasuke said. "Well, that's commendable," the jounin smiled slightly under his mask. "Remember kids, in the shinobi world, those who break the rules are called trash, but those who don't care about their comrades are much worse than trash." "Well, the training is over," the jounin said. "We'll meet tomorrow at 9 at the Hokage's residence." Then the 7th team's mentor disappeared into the shunshin. "Shall we go celebrate?" Uzumaki said. "It's possible," the Uchiha answered monosyllabically. "Can I come with you?" Sakura asked with hope in her voice, immediately forgetting about hunger and the open bento in her hands. "It's possible," Sasuke said. "But first, the seal explosion needs to be dug up back," Naruto said with amusement. 3 guys were wandering through the streets of Konoha. All of them were dirty with earth, each had a whole heap of leaves and small twigs in his hair. Stuffed into the pockets of each of them were a lot of explosion seals, which the Uchiha simply left for his teammates, because he had the clan's old supplies, and they had nothing. 2 guys walked with a confident gait towards the Uchiha quarter, and their friend, who was walking with them, was in 7th heaven, sometimes plunging into her own fantasies. She lost her step and fell, but one of the guys certainly caught her. The girl couldn't believe that in just a couple of minutes she would find herself in the holy of holies of her lover, and that's how she christened Sasuke's house for herself, and the whole block in addition. As she approached the place, she began to turn her head in surprise, because in her opinion this place was always empty, the quarter was a ghost. But the girl did not think that the Uchiha quarter is not only the clan mansion and the houses of the rest of the Uchihas. Shops, benches, cafes, a couple of blacksmith shops and other establishments. There was a lot here that previously belonged to the Uchihas, who could not do ninja work, but now it was all rented out to ordinary people. A man of about 40 literally ran up to the trio, dark short hair, a round face, burnt eyebrows and narrowed eyes, or maybe just closed. Sasuke-sama, let me congratulate you. A kind smile appeared on the man's face, and from somewhere from the folds of his clothes he took out a package, shaped suspiciously like a bottle. With a grateful nod, the Uchiha accepted the gift, and then the bacchanalia began. Every second one congratulated the young heir on the fact that he had finally taken the path of the ninja and handed over the gift, but that's how they knew that they should congratulate today, and not yesterday. None of the 7th team knew. On the approach to the clan mansion, the trio of ninjas looked like loaded horses, each of them carrying such a mountain of gifts that they could not see the road beyond it. Somehow passing by empty houses that Sasuke never decided to rent out. Finally, the mansion of the head of the clan appeared before the trio. As soon as they approached, the door opened. A girl froze on the threshold, her dark eyes seemed to look through the members of the 7th team. Her clothes were covered in dust and dirt. It seemed that the girl had just been torn from training. "Greetings, brother," she said, nodding her head slightly towards Sasuke. "It's good to see you, Uzumaki-dano." The girl also nodded her head towards Naruto. "How many times to repeat, just Naruto," the blonde said forcedly, looking at the dark-haired girl condemningly. "I'm home, sister," Sasuke said with a slight smile, causing Sakura to have another fit of emotion and another fantasy that clouded her mind. Ayumi herself, and it was she, nodded again. The tips of her lips twitched in a smile, joy flashed in her eyes. Having entered inside, the 7th team unloaded a bunch of gifts, while Ayumi went somewhere to the 2nd floor, most likely to change clothes. The trio went into the guest room, where they were met by a man sitting in a wheelchair, his back to the 7th team. In front of him there was some kind of sketch on a low easel. "Hello, Izao," Uzumaki shouted cheerfully, coming closer to the artist. "What are you drawing?" "Eh? You've returned," the man said, still not taking his eyes off the easel. "I'm drawing." I don't even know what to say." On the easel there were only outlines folding into a gate. They were reeking of an unknown force and something else, but only Uzumaki understood what. For a moment, the blonde fell into a stupor looking at the easel. "Izao, you don't know exactly what this is?" Uzumaki Elric clarified with a slight frown. "They're strange," Sakura said, looking at the easel. "Huh," Sasuke said briefly. So, a smile began to appear on the blonde's face. His hand went into his jacket pocket and took out a small piece of paper. "Izao, take this." "And?" the Uchiha asked with interest, twirling a piece of paper in his fingers. On one side of it a certain seal could be seen. "Stick it to the picture, then slap it with your palm with the desire to activate it," Uzumaki explained. "Got it." "Wow," the artist said in surprise, watching how, together with a small piece of paper, the entire easel was covered with a network of lightning, and then seemed to flow, and in the end simply disappear. "What's this?" Ayumi Uchiha almost forgot all those horrors during the extermination of the clan, but still sometimes she had nightmares. The faces of people, close and not so close, swirled in a kaleidoscope mixed with seas of blood and bloody blades. But during such dreams, she always woke up from the feeling of someone's palm squeezing her hand. Uchiha Sasuke, the son of the head of the clan, became a brother to her. He always helped the girl, be it a task from the academy or any everyday problem. Although sometimes attempts to help led to very funny consequences, for example, when Sasuke volunteered to sew up a torn dress while picking up a needle for the first time. Ayumi also considered Uzumaki Naruto a brother, but still, in memory of his act, she still called him Naruto-dano or Uzumaki-sama, to which the boy was very irritated. Although it was irritation that played the main factor in such treatment, because the face of an irritated Naruto was so funny that sometimes the girl simply could not resist. Uzumaki also visited the girl quite often, but what can I say, he only left the Uchiha quarter for the night, and to go to the academy. He taught the girl to fight, showed different techniques that sometimes did not fit together at all, and only spoke about the style of list. I can swing my legs, but you try to poke your finger so that your opponent is twisted in spasm, although the girl had another option to learn the Uchiha style tailored specifically for them, but alas, there was no master. Sasuke himself did not know him completely. Izao. At first the girl didn't even know how to perceive him, because she was taught that anyone who could not benefit the clan was a nonentity. Her family was radical in this matter. But Sasuke convinced the girl otherwise, and then the disabled person himself showed himself. The girl had never seen such vivid paintings before. Sometimes it seemed as if in front of her was not a drawing, but a photo. At times, Hinata wandering into the neighborhood scared Ayumi. Hyuga was incredibly quiet, always trying to hide in the shadows, but Uzumaki always clearly recognized where she was. For the first time, Ayumi thought that some kind of game was going on between these two, but a little later, when the girl herself noticed Hinata, it dawned on her that something was wrong with the girl. Love burned in Hyuga's eyes, but a certain fanaticism and a bit of madness were also discernible. Since then, Ayumi always walked around, afraid to see the girl obsessed with love behind her. There were many gods in the world, both small and not so small. Many of them were such from birth, and some earned the right to be called gods with sweat and blood. And now one of those, who earned the right, was watching the world. He was here from its very appearance, having come from another. He watched with interest the world, wars, and their endings. This god was the one who accompanied the souls of the departed on their final journey. People called him Shinigami. Although he was no stranger to such a nickname. And now Shinigami was watching the world. A grin appeared on his face, always hidden by the mask that everyone considers his face. He was simply not capable of smiling. A new force, previously unknown, gradually invaded the world. Maybe some god managed to break through the defenses of this world, erected by one of the first people to achieve the power of a god. Or maybe the unknown person managed to send into this world someone who brought his will, and the crumbs of his faith were enough to be embodied here. But Shinigami was not interested in the new god, he was more interested in the first, so to speak, believer. The god of death saw him as a baby, and then watched him for a long time. After all, the boy was an Uzumaki, and he and Shinigami once had a contract. The young Uzumaki reminded God of him, in the distant years of his formation. Sheer strength, a lot of enthusiasm and the instincts of a fighter, as well as firmness of conviction, but alas, a minimum of training. But as soon as he reached the powers of the new god, he began to change dramatically. The kid absorbed everything like a sponge, ninja techniques, his incomprehensible alchemy. He grabbed his head. "Heh, I did it much later," the god of death said with a sad grin, going into memories. His eyes instantly changed color to brown, and the scara became white again. The old god recalled the times when his hair was still deep red. With every piece of paper raised, with every weed pulled out and pet found, their team spirit strengthens, the mentor thought, looking at the three kids who were doing yet another routine job that one of the civilians was too lazy to do. "Captain, the target is in sight," Uzumaki's voice was heard in Kakashi's earpiece, and again the voice was too serious for the 13-year-old boy. Sometimes in the blond man's gaze, Hatake noticed something that was completely uncharacteristic of children, even those of the clan. Where there was usually an unhealthy interest in everything, there was something strange, as if the look of two different eyes was saying a little mockingly, "I haven't seen anything like that, so there's nothing there that would surprise me." "Got it," Hatake responded wearily. "Conduct a seizure." Sasuke, Pattern 3, Naruto said in a tired voice as well. 3? It seems like we need the whole cat, the Uchiha responded uncertainly. Scheme 3? Hatake asked with interest. An explosion. Uzumaki has explosive seals in his own developments in all the pockets of his clothes, followed Sakura's explanation. This is the daimyo's wife's cat, Kakashi decided to remind him, as if by chance. Okay, Uzumaki responded tiredly. Sasuke, go around him in front, you'll have enough speed. Sakura, you'll be behind him a little faster, I'll come in from the side. Ticks? The mentor said with a slight chuckle. Is it okay that there will still be an escape route? Is it okay that I'm an alchemist? Uzumaki asked irritably, then only silence was heard over the communication channel. I wish I knew in full what this alchemist of yours means, Hatake threw into the void. Uzumaki Elric had long since discovered the essence of D-rank missions. They essentially served as the beginning for each team, as well as a measure of punishment for ninjas who were more senior in rank, and even in service time. During all sorts of crazy assignments like walking dogs, the kids learned patience and also got used to each other, but more experienced ninjas were just wasting their time. They were also forbidden to use chakra on tasks of this rank, so this was quite a punishment for them. But the newly assembled trio of genin could use everything, so on such missions, team number 7 rested. Having imbued the body with chakra, it was possible without any problems to quickly pull out unwanted weeds and restrain a dog that was tearing from its leash. Sitting with children did not cause any problems for anyone at all. It turned out that the little thing listens to Uzumaki quite well, and Sakura loved to tinker with small ones. Only Sasuke frowned slightly at the sight of them, apparently understanding that he would have a lot of them, but the clan still needed to be restored. And now it was one of the D-rank missions, but Naruto literally felt in his gut that this was most likely the last such simple mission. And the cat they were chasing smelled of chakra, so he could bet his favorite cloak that it was a kind of test. The cat was brown in color, with several stripe marks on the body. They were of a lighter shade. There was a red ribbon on the left ear, which somehow had not yet flown off the ear. Here the Uchiha sharply accelerated, with a smooth jump simply flying over the cat, which was already approaching the exit from the forest. Immediately behind the cat was Sakura, and Uzumaki flew out from her left side. Tora rushed to the only accessible side, but a wall made of wood appeared in front of her out of nowhere. The cat stopped for a second, and several kunai immediately flew at her. Twisting, she let them pass by her and was about to run again when she was swaddled with fishing line tied to several kunai. A blond man immediately appeared in front of her, holding an explosion seal in his hand. Well, kitty, Naruto said, shaking the piece of paper in his hand. You understand what kind of thing I have in my hands, right? Uzumaki, are you talking to a cat? Sakura said in surprise. Chuck Beast, Sasuke reluctantly explained. Like a conscript, except he can't speak. But he understands perfectly, the blonde said, nodding. Well, kitty, won't you rock the boat? In response, the cat furiously nodded her head and stopped trying to escape from the fishing line that entangled her. Sarutobi Hiruzen sat waiting for the 7th command. On his left was Yumino Irika, who today gave out tasks to the genin. To the left of the Hokage was an obese madam, who is the wife of the daimyo of the Land of Fire. Madam Shinji was a frequent visitor to Konoha, but why she came was a mystery. Not every time she went to see her friends. But this was undoubtedly a big plus, for this woman often lost her cat Toru, which was a gift to her from the daimyo himself. Well, the cat was not quite ordinary, so it was quite suitable for testing new groups of genin. Fortunately she very often got lost, sometimes she even ran away, twice a day. The door to the reception room opened and 4 people walked inside. Hatake, as always, looked at the book. The Uchiha straightened the white collar of his jacket and glanced sideways at the cat, which was in a small wooden cage in the hands of an unusually gloomy Uzumaki. Only Haruno looked as always. My darling. She immediately screamed and took the cage into her hands. The Hokage saw a small explosion seal lying at the bottom of the cage, just under the cat's paw. "Thank you for finding my Torochka," Shinji shouted again. "Now I will return your cage." "No, no, no," Uzumaki immediately responded. "This is a gift, let him sit in it for now." "What a cute boy," Shinji said with a smile, approaching Naruto. Her hand rested on the top of his head. "Thanks a lot." With a quick gait, the daimyo's wife left the reception room, and Naruto only smiled expectantly, looking after her. The task is completed, Hokage-sama," Kakashi nevertheless deigned to raise his voice. "Naruto-kun, what kind of seal was in the cage?" Hiruzen nevertheless decided to clarify, ignoring Hatake. "This is an experiment," the blonde said with a smile. "Tora is a chuck beast, so I was wondering if they could activate seals, and I threw the weak one inside." "Naruto, this is the daimyo's wife," Iruka shouted. "Her cat gets lost 6 times a day, it won't hurt her," the blonde said irritably. Naruto, they can activate the seals," Hatake decided to say. "So your experiment essentially makes no sense. Couldn't you have said it before?" Stared at the Uzumaki mentor. "Well, you didn't ask," Kakashi answered with a cheerful grin under his mask. "Okay. This mission is closed," the Hokage said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "So what are we next?" "Clean up the enclosures of the Inuzuka clan," Iruka began to read. "To sit with the headman's child." While Yumino read out the different options, Hiruzen watched the children's reaction, which was completely absent. Apparently they guessed it. Sarutobi summed up and waved his hand at Iruka, ordering him to stop. "Well, who's first?" the Hokage asked with interest. "Sasuke," the Uzumaki responded, only an irritated "pft" came from the Uchiha. "The Sharingan also detects chakra, then I felt it, and when the cat dodged a couple of kunai, it already reached Sakura." "And what should I do with you?" Hiruzen said wearily. "Rank C, escort and protection of a bridge builder?" Yumino suggested, looking at the kids and smiling at something. A little later, not far from Konoha, Tora was perplexed. One of the people who caught her left the cat just a royal gift. The seal that was still lying under her paws was felt very faintly, and the cat had encountered quite a few such seals in her time. So, if this particular one works, then there will be only a small zilch and a shock wave that will easily destroy the cage, but will not cause any inconvenience to the cat itself. Joy appeared on Tora's face, and her paws lay on the seal. A couple of drops of strength went down the paws to the drawing. The seal worked with a faint bang, but to Tora's surprise there was no shock wave. Instead, the bottom of the cage cracked. Gathering all her strength, the cat hit the bars and the cage swayed slightly. The Tora struck again, and then again. From the next blow, the cage fell on its side. The cracked bottom of the cage appeared in front of the cat's face. The first blow caused the cracks to spread further, the next one knocked out a small piece of wood, and the last one caused half of the bottom to fly off. Once outside, Tora thanked her cat gods for the fact that Madame Shinji always carried the cat with her luggage, and also for the fact that she decided not to change the cage. This was Tora's last escape from Daimyo's wife. No one saw this cat again, well, except perhaps for the kids in one of the villages on the border of the land of fire and the country of rice fields, but no one called the cat Tora anymore, and she's been away from the Red Bow for a long time. Got rid of it. In a hurry, Uzumaki threw the most important things into his backpack. No, he, of course, had a couple of sealing scrolls, but they were intended only for food, and the blonde's own attempts to practice fuinjutsu were still rather weak. One of his developments turned out to be a kind of fragmentation grenade. It was an ordinary scroll for a weapon, which, when released, exploded, scattering fragments of things sealed in it around itself. Of course, the boy was trained in the very basics, taught to him by his mentor June, but all that the blonde did perfectly was an explosion of seals, in which he could even regulate the strength of the explosion and its direction. And the guy wasn't particularly interested in Fuin. Until now he was trying to remember everything about alchemy. His memory was gaping, but still he remembered several specialized circles, one universal one too. Although the blonde himself did not need them, because, as Mustang had once put it, flapping alchemy was still with him. All the research and attempts to remember were only to teach others. Yes, exactly others. The surprise when Naruto's friend Shin was able to activate simple decay was beyond words. It was on that day that the Alchemical Techniques Development Bureau was born, which in fact was just a club of interests, in which only 2 guys were members. But then, after several successful tests and implementation, Shin and Naruto showed their achievements to the 3rd Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen. The old man frowned slightly, leafing through the papers covered with formulas, diagrams and calculations. After a thorough inspection, he only asked for a demonstration. Then Sarutobi just twitched his eyebrow slightly, maintaining a mask of impartiality on his face, and quietly asked, "Is it possible to teach this to others?" To which the blonde replied, "Only if others have gates." Nobody explained what the gate was to Hiruzen, and Shin didn't know it either. It was known only to Naruto, but after that day, the Alchemical Techniques Development Bureau was officially founded, 3 ANBU were assigned to the kids, a training ground was allocated on the outskirts of the village, and almost every day they sent people to check, but, alas, of all the ninjas of the village, only 4, not counting Uzumaki himself, his student Shin, and the crippled Uchiha, could use alchemy. Having put all the necessary things in a small backpack, food, a first aid kit, a change of clothes, etc., Naruto chuckled with satisfaction. Throwing the backpack over his shoulders, the boy jumped several times, checking to see if anything was rattling in it, and only then attached a pouch tightly stuffed with kunai and shuriken to his leg. Leaving the house, Uzumaki Elric cast a sad glance at the door of his apartment. "I hope I return to this house," the blonde finally thought, and then quickly ran towards the collection point. Uchiha Sasuke never showed fear, but now, standing at the gate, he realized that that strange feeling that arose somewhere in the depths of his consciousness was nothing other than him. The brunette had never left the village before. The realization that they, the Uchiha and his team, were about to leave their native land sent a shiver through his body. Squinting his eyes slightly, Sasuke began to examine his teammates. Hirono was surprisingly silent, her lips were compressed into a thin line, and her eyes kept looking from the small insect under her feet to the checkpoint booth, then somewhere else. The girl was worried and, oddly enough, the realization of this fact made the Uchiha calm down a little. Uzumaki stood right at the checkpoint booth with his arms crossed over his chest. His scarlet coat was nowhere to be seen, he was wearing a light gray jacket, and the collar of a mesh t-shirt was visible from under the unzipped zipper. And Sasuke himself also did not dare to wear his orange jacket for the mission. Naruto did not hide his irritation and some fear. The boy cast strange glances at the road that stretched beyond the gate, and his foot slightly stamped every now and then, beating out an uneven rhythm. "Oh, you're already here," Kakashi's voice rang out, suddenly appearing from somewhere in the Shunshin whirlwind. A small backpack was also visible behind the mentor's back, and in his hands was a familiar book with an orange cover. "You're a little early, you still have 10 minutes left." "Something else surprises me more," Sasuke said gloomily. "Someone, pinch me," Sakura says in surprise. "Kakashi-sensei, are you sick?" Naruto asked with some concern in his voice. "Mama, can't I come on time?" Hatake says somewhat surprised. "You came early," Uzumaki said, emphasizing the last word. "That's what's strange," the Uchiha adds to his friend. "Are we heading out or haven't you talked enough yet?" The voice of the customer is heard as he walked up to the 7th team with a wobbling gait. There was no sign of intelligence on his face, and the bottle in his hand reeked of something unimaginable, so much so that even Kakashi winced a little under his mask. Behind the man's back was a very voluminous backpack, about half the size of Tazuna. But this will be a long journey, Sasuke involuntarily thinks, realizing that they will have to go at the speed of the slowest member of the group, that is, the customer. Sakura could barely contain herself, attempts to calm her own nerves were unsuccessful. So now the girl, in order to somehow distract herself, bombarded her mentor with questions. Either she became interested in the political situation in the country of waves, or about shinobi. In general, good old Sakura woke up in her and bombarded the teachers with questions. And the mentor understood everything correctly and answered each of her questions, and very exhaustively. But then the girl lost her step a little when she noticed a thing on the road that couldn't be there. A large puddle of water was located to the left of the road. And this despite the fact that there had been no rain for the next week and the temperature was quite high. Out of the corner of her eye, the pink-haired girl noticed that the pouch on Uzumaki's leg was already open, and the Uchiha had somehow changed his gait. Only Hatake walked with his eyes still fixed on the book and somewhat mechanically continued to conduct a dialogue with Sakura. Two blurry silhouettes fly out of the puddle. A moment later the mentor of the 7th team finds himself entangled in a spiked chain that was connected to both enemy ninjas. Both shinobi were of average height and had dark brown hair, one had it straight and almost touched his shoulders, and the other had a spiky mane that stretched almost to the middle of his back. The lower parts of both faces were covered with respirators, and horns were attached to the protectors. One brother had one, and the other had two. The only thing Sakura managed to do was take out a kunai and take a few steps towards Tazuna to try to cover him. Left! Naruto shouted, making a sharp jerk forward. Right! Sasuke echoed him, also quickly running away. But contrary to his words, the blonde threw the right nuke aside with a blow of his open palm, and the brunette kicked the left one into the air. The chain connecting the monstrous gloves of the renegades tightened, and several kunai thrown by Naruto and Sasuke immediately flew along it. There was an explosion. Apparently there was an explosion seal on one of the kunai. The chain broke. Here the fist of one of the renegades rushed towards Uzumaki. The guy, turning on his heel, eluded the blades of the glove smeared with poison. Then, clapping his palms, he touches the Nukanin's hand. With a quiet rustle lightning runs along his limbs. The fabric of the clothes fell apart, followed by the flesh that began to disintegrate. Here the hand, separated from the body, falls to the ground, and the scream of pain of Nukanin reaches everyone's ears. The second one, distracted by a scream, misses one of Sasuke's blows and flies off to a tree. Several kunai are already flying after him, connected by thin chakra-conducting wire. And now the second attacker is literally tied to a tree. Not a bad job, comes the voice of Hatake, who comes out from somewhere in the bushes. He immediately finds himself next to the body without an arm and bends down to check the pulse. Nukanin simply lost consciousness from pain shock and is still alive, Kakashi mentally states. Sasuke and Naruto are great, the coach of the 7th team says out loud. Yes, and you, Sakura, correctly assessed your strength and decided to cover Tazuna. My verdict, pretty good. No one even thought to ask Hatake a question about how he escaped the clutches of death and the embrace of the chain, because everyone understood that he was not their mentor for nothing, and also a jounin. And yes, this mission is no longer rank C, Kakashi says without changing his face, turning his gaze to the bridge builder who had sobered up at the moment. I couldn't do otherwise, Tazuna began his confused story. Our country is very poor, and it's all Gado's fault. He controls almost everything in the country, and those who disagree with him disappear without a trace. Our country is on the verge of collapse and the bridge that I am building is the only hope for the country of waves. Okay, the captain of the 7th team says gloomily. For now, think about whether we should continue the mission, while I interrogate these guys. Hatake pointed the toe of his sandal at the Nukanin lying next to him. Or does someone want a crash course in interrogations? Kakashi asked casually, throwing his body over his shoulder. I want to, Sakura suddenly said and took a step forward. I must be useful in at least something, the girl thought irritably, and if she is weak for a fight, then she will find strength for interrogations, especially since her knowledge of medicine will completely help her with this. Uzumaki Elric never considered himself a good guy, he understood that many of his actions led to a completely bad result. But at heart he was still a kind boy who wanted to help everyone and everything. And that's why he didn't even think about his mentor's question, but just glanced at the Uchiha. Sasuke just shrugged in response, as if saying, he knows where you go and where I go. So in this vote, victory was already on the side of Tazuna and the country of waves. Of course, there was also Sakura's voice, but the guys knew her too well and understood that the girl would try to find a couple of excuses to retreat, but then she would still follow them. While the guys were thinking, next to them the customer was babbling and babbling. Talking about their poor country, unbearable taxes, lack of food in the markets and other troubles. There were two people standing very close behind the thick bushes. Sakura barely restrained the urge to vomit while looking at the disgusting stump, which just a minute ago was quite a good hand. The girl quickly rewinded it, winning a few more minutes of life for the new Knin. Next to the pink-haired girl stood the mentor of the 7th team, in front of him on the ground lay the second apostate, wrapped in several dozen turns of chakra wire. So, that means you are Gozu, Hatake says, lifting his protector up, thereby opening a previously closed eye. And that disabled person must be Meizu. Demon brothers? Sakura said in surprise, realizing whose hand she was now bandaging. Oh, have you read the bingo book? Kakashi asks, turning his gaze to his subordinate. Yes, I brought Naruto to training one day, Haruno answers, nodding slightly, and then finally tightens the tourniquet on Meizu's arm. Well then, I think I don't need to tell you who they are, Hatake says, nodding his head slightly, and Sakura, too tense with the situation, did not notice Kakashi's eyes flashing scarlet. And now you'll tell me everything, the mentor of the 7th team says gloomily, looking into the eyes of the man who has not uttered a word since his capture. Although outwardly Hatake seemed somewhat relaxed, after learning the information his nerves were tense. Still, it's not every day that a local rich man declares a hunt for them, and at the same time sends 2 renegade chunin after you under the command of an S-class new Knin, Momochi Zabuza. But there was still something good in this situation. Team number 7 showed itself to be just that, a team in a combat situation. Coordinated actions, complete understanding of each other, as well as unexpected like-mindedness. When Kakashi left for questioning, he left a clone in the foliage of one of the trees. And what he observed surprised him. Naruto and Sasuke didn't even exchange a few words, and when Hatake himself returned along with Sakura, who endured the interrogation extremely stoically, and the mentor mainly used the Sharingan so as not to particularly traumatize the girl's psyche, she just exhaled tiredly and asked resignedly, I take it we're moving on? Amazing, the mentor thought for the umpteenth time that day. For several days now he had been analyzing the behavior of his students in a stressful situation. And again I came to the conclusion that the 7th team was incredible. Moreover, the gray-haired man did not consider himself part of the team, because they had not even really worked together yet. And it was still too early for him to be called a teacher for them, but still they still had everything ahead of them. This will be the strongest team in Konoha, Hatake thought confidently. Somewhere on the periphery of his brain, cries about the power of youth and eternal rivalry flashed, and then he suddenly realized that these kids could do with finding eternal rivals for themselves. When I get back, I'll talk to Guy, Kakashi thought, hiding a smile under his mask, and then shuddered, imagining his students in green suits. Uzumaki Elric always felt the approach of problems. If in a previous life this was accompanied by slight pain in the places where the prostheses were attached, then in this one his burned scar on his cheek began to tingle and his hand also began to itch slightly. And now, feeling this, he involuntarily jerked his hand with the clutched kunai, his fingers shot with pain and the piece of iron fell into the bushes. From where the blonde a moment ago heard a suspicious noise. "Uzumaki, this is a rabbit," Sakura says somehow doomedly, looking at the carcass strung with a kunai that was discovered behind the bushes. "White," the blonde stated quietly, and then abruptly began to fall to the ground, dragging Sakura with him. The same action was performed by Uchiha in the company of Tazuna. Kakashi jumped up sharply. And then a long and wide sword crashed into the tree, and Hatake immediately landed on it. "That's who I didn't expect to meet here," the Jounin said quietly. "Ya?" came a faintly surprised voice from a man who appeared in the middle of the road, wearing only pants and sandals, bandages on his face and a sword sling not counting. "I can't believe you didn't get all the information out of your brothers." "Momochi Zabuza, one of the swordsmen of the mist," Kakashi said, more for the children than for himself. "Demon of the hidden mist." Kakashi's Sharingan, Momochi says slowly, and then with an incredibly quick movement he is next to the tree and pulls the sword out of it. Hatake hits his head with a quick blow while jumping. With a quiet gurgle, the water clone falls to the ground in a puddle of water, and the sword he threw somewhere back falls into the hands of the real Momochi. "Protect the customer," the mentor gives the order to the genin, and then rushes towards the enemy. Now he is already flying up to Zabuza, but immediately the entire area is covered in fog. Here the Uchiha barely manages to repel the unexpected blow of the enemy, who flew out of the fog at an unimaginable speed. The subsequent blow made Sasuke stagger and take a step back, the kunai with which the guy blocked the blow shattered into pieces. Then there was a clap of his hands and Uzumaki, at the limit of his capabilities, jerked forward touching the enemy, who at the same moment scattered with water, which immediately began to evaporate. "A clone again," the Uchiha throws irritably, realizing that he is unacceptably weak. And that he needs to become stronger for himself and for the sake of his family. Meanwhile, the sounds of battle could be heard from the dense fog. Now the clang of steel was heard, now through the dense ring of fog lightning flashed and fire blazed. The bulk of the water dragon rose above the fog, and its exact copy appeared opposite it. Both vehicles collided, raining down tons of water on the ground, and the fog began to dissipate. "We're screwed," Uzumaki states quietly, looking at his mentor who has fallen into an unknown trap. Hatake's figure was encased in a water ball next to which stood Momochi, whose arm was immersed up to the elbow in a kind of water prison. "Well, kids?" Zabuza says menacingly. "Why don't you run? Or do you imagine yourself to be a shinobi?" Pathetic parody. "Sasuke, Scheme 3, Uzumaki says somehow doomedly, completely unbuttoning his jacket. The Uchiha did not object, but only grinned, realizing that this plan reeked of nonsense. Sakura looks at Uzumaki with an incredulous gaze, not understanding how he decided on such a suicidal plan. "Kato, Phoenix Flowers," the Uchiha spits out quickly after making several lightning-fast seals, several small clots of fire fly forward, and the Uzumaki begins to run after them. Hatake reproached himself for his imprudence, looking at his subordinates. He wanted to shout at them to run, but the water around him did not allow him to do this, and there was already quite a bit of air in his lungs. Here he notices the attack of Sasuke and the Uzumaki running ahead. "We need to do something," Kakashi begins to think in panic. His plans were already to try to use Kamui, as Uzumaki knocks back one of Zabuza's clones with a blow. "And this is a shinobi?" Zabuza cried irritably, noting out of the corner of his eye that the blonde was still combat-ready and a grin appeared on his face. "Cats," Uzumaki shouts, folding the seal. The jacket that was previously on him was now lying not far from Zabuza, since during the strike it seemed to accidentally fly off. The explosion raised a cloud of mud and water. When the peculiar curtain fell, Momochi saw no trace of the kids or his goal. "Okay, well done," Hatake thought, almost on the edge, wanting only the survival of his charges. "Hide and hide, but I'll find you anyway," Momochi said when a couple more water clones landed on the water next to him. Sitting in a small stone depression created by alchemical decomposition not far from that same tree, Naruto rubbed his stomach with annoyance, on which there was a large bruise. "What do we do?" Haruno asked excitedly and quietly. "According to logic, we have to retreat," the Uchiha says doomedly. "I have a plan," Uzumaki says, frowning. "If things get out of control, grab Kakashi and get out." Quickly jumping back, the blonde walked slowly towards Zabuza. Nuke-Nin, seeing Naruto, involuntarily grinned and spat out an insult for the umpteenth time. "He wants to kill me. Kill Sasuke and Sakura," Naruto began repeating to himself like a mantra. "The bastard grabbed my mentor." With every step, Uzumaki Elric began to feel the power that spread through his veins. Unforgivable, the boy literally growled, surprising Zabuza not with his hefty thirst for blood, but also with his eyes that changed color to red and with an elongated pupil. "Jinchuriki," Momochi states quietly, realizing that the situation is not going in his best favor, because an enraged demon vessel is always dangerous. Kyubi no Yoko, despite the opinions of many, was not such a monster. This Biju had just lived too much and understood what blind faith or simple friendship could lead to. And people never treated him kindly, except, of course, for the old man Rikudo, whom Kyubi didn't particularly want to remember, because although he gave him life, it was in a very filthy world. But there was something about people that captivated the fox, namely their feelings. But because of its nature, Kyubi rarely evoked anything other than anger and hatred in people, and naturally began to treat them the same way. "Unforgivable." A voice echoed throughout the subconscious of the fox vessel. Kyubi reluctantly opened one eye, seeing a figure behind the bars of the cage. The guy is short, with long blonde hair braided in a braid that falls to the middle of his back. He himself was dressed in a red cloak, black leather pants and heavy boots, with metal-bound socks. The belt from his pants served as the protector of a village hidden in the foliage. "Kyubi," the jailer said without a drop of fear in his voice. "I came for something." "Let me guess." A predatory grin crawled onto the fox's muzzle, and his voice oozed poison. "For strength?" "Exactly," the boy nodded gloomily. "You think it will be so simple, human?" the beast growled threateningly. "No, because I have one rule that I have been adhering to for quite some time." A crooked grin appeared on the blonde's face. "If you want to receive something, then be ready to give something in return." That sounds much better than what my captors usually offered me," Kyubi said more interestedly. "And what in return?" "When I ask for your strength," even a hint of a smile disappeared from the blonde's face. "Then you will receive complete control over my body, but only on the condition that you eliminate the threat to those people whom I indicate." "Ahahaha," a tempting offer, the bijou laughed in response, and then moved his muzzle close to the cage. "But why did you decide that I would not break the contract?" At that moment, the gates that were arriving behind the boys opened, and incredible power breathed out of them again. A white, faceless figure stepped out of their darkness. "As I understand it, truth will see to it," the jailer said with a wry smile. So be it," the fox said reluctantly. "I agree." The white figure silently moved away from the gate and touched the bars of the cage. Light ripples immediately ran through them, which, upon reaching the seal, changed it just a little. "Interesting," came 100 voices from the figure. "Edward, the remnants of someone's consciousness were sealed in it." "Still, I decided to vote," the jailer responded. Kyubi did not hear the rest of the conversation, since a moment later he stood in the middle of a small puddle. And a kunai was sticking out of his side, which had previously been in the hands of some man with a fog protector. "What the?" Sakura said quietly with literally all her being, feeling the wave of power that spread throughout the area. "Is this Uzumaki? Don't tell me you didn't know?" the Uchiha asked, raising his eyebrow skeptically. What? Tazuna whispered. The man was shaking with fear. A wet spot was beginning to spread on his pants. "Everything is fine," the Uchiha said calmly, looking at the customer and motioned with his hand to Sakura, who, understanding him, immediately knocked out the bridge builder. "So what's wrong with Naruto?" the girl asked, laying Tezuna's body on the ground. "Are you familiar with the concept of a Jinchuriki?" Sasuke asked, carefully watching Haruno's facial expressions. That is, fear crept onto Haruno's face for a moment, understanding the one with whom she had argued on any issue a few years ago and even hit her on the head a couple of times. "He's just a kind person," Sasuke said with a frown. "And that's why you're still alive." Yes, Sakura said, remembering how many times she was on the verge of death. "Hey, you!" Suddenly there was a roar from the direction Naruto ran away to. "Do you understand that for damaging this carcass I will devour your soul?" "Sensei, I let you down." Kakashi Hatake felt remorseful, looking at how his student was covered in a seething mass of scarlet chakra. How his hair unravels from a braid and immediately gathers into 9 strands that develop behind his back like the 9 tails of a demon sealed within him. "No," the man screams, letting a portion of water into his lungs when he notices how a water clone of Zabuza appears next to the boy frozen in place and plunges a kunai into his side. "Hey, you!" the blonde begins to say, sharply raising his hand to the right and punching through the clone. Kakashi clearly understood that in this situation it was no longer Naruto. "You understand what kind of damage this carcass is?" A grin appeared on the boy's face. The mass of chakra that was spreading over his body became denser, and under it one could see how the skin in open areas began to peel off and immediately burn. "I will eat your soul." All the chakra that covered his body suddenly began to gather into one point, which he covered in an instant with his palms. Then he sharply waved his hands towards Momochi, who at the same moment interrupted the water prison technique and rushed to the side, which gave Hatake the opportunity to pour all the remaining chakra into his legs and move away with a crazy jump. The blast wave hit Kakashi while still in flight, although it was not a Bijtu bomb, but only some semblance of it, but it exploded well. For a moment, the elite Jounin's gaze turned dark. "Can you tell me why I'm here?" Elric asked the white figure, not really hoping for an answer, who was examining 2 small lights in his hands. "Contract, Alchemist," hundreds of voices answered. "We concluded it so that you could return home again." "Then why am I here?" The boy slowly but surely began to get excited. The desire to try to hit the god already flashed through his mind. "And why don't I know his conditions?" Still as hot-tempered, Istina stated. "When the time comes, you will remember everything, but tell me now, Alchemist." "Say that?" Edward asked, raising his voice. "Have you already become attached to anyone in this world?" A smile appeared on the part that was supposed to be the creature's face, as if drawn on it with a pencil. "I'm finished," the fox suddenly said, who until that moment had just been quietly lying in the cage with his eyes closed. After this phrase, Uzumaki Elric felt his legs buckle, and then a crater from the explosion flashed before his eyes, into which he fell face first. Haku Yuki, despite the chosen line of behavior of his mentor, respected him very much, and more than once said that he was only a tool of Zabuza-sama. These words were so deeply absorbed into him that the weapon mask simply fused to his face, and Momochi had also long since merged with his demon mask. So the two complemented each other perfectly. I wonder what can rip them off us. Such thoughts have long visited perhaps the last representative of the Yuki clan. And then one fine day Haku found out this answer, but he didn't like it at all. Zabuza-sama, the boy said, bending over his mentor's body, for the 100th time. His hands, shrouded in a light green glow, were the only thing that still supported life in his mutilated body. A deep burn spread across Momochi's back that refused to heal. His left arm was cut off at the shoulder by his own sword, his heart was barely beating, and there were more than a dozen other minor internal injuries. Don't you dare die, Momochi, Haku spat out angrily. In an attempt to stop the bleeding in the stump of his arm, Yuki no longer cared about the burn, since he realized that he was unable to heal it. What kind of weapon am I if my master is a corpse? Ka, broken blade? Zabuza suddenly said after a hoarse exhalation. You woke up, a smile appeared on the guy's face, pure and bright, the kind that has no place in a world ruled by hired killers. I was thinking, Zabuza said with long pauses after each word. Hush, even though I stopped the bleeding and dulled the pain from the burn, but no one cancelled the multiple injuries to the internal organs, said Haku, healing another cracked rib. That's it, Momochi began to say again. Let's collect money from all the caches. We'll buy a house. Yes, of course, and we'll grow peach trees there, Yuki said unusually sarcastically. Now shut up, Zabuza-sama, and don't interfere with your treatment. Lying face down in the crater from the explosion of the pseudo-Baijidama, Uzumaki Elric indulged in doing nothing. And no, the problem was not a fit of laziness or reluctance to lift the body from the warm ground. The guy simply couldn't. His whole body was burning, only in some areas the skin was intact. The chakra channels itched brutally from the inside, hinting that they too were now slowly but surely recovering from the consequences. And the boy's thoughts were not at all occupied with what happened moments ago in the real world, but with what truth told him. And what they agreed on with him a long time ago. The blonde remembered that God did not want to accept payment for the gate and himself proposed a workaround. But Elric understood perfectly well that even such a path has a price. And the universe announced this price. But the alchemist could not at all remember the words that then made him shudder and freeze for a whole half-hour of thought. Thinking about this, Uzumaki Elric did not notice the arrival of his teammate at all. The Uchiha squatted down next to the fried body and looked around. So he jumped out of the funnel, only to go back to its center a second later, holding a small branch in his hands. He wanted to make sure that Uzumaki was alive. Actually, no. Sasuke could see perfectly well that the blonde was fine, even if he looked like an overcooked piece of meat. But he breathes smoothly and without any problems, does not ask for help, even if he is conscious, and, therefore, what? This means everything is in order, and anyway the 7th team did not have the necessary medicines for Uzumaki, the most they could do was stuff him with painkillers and turn him into a mummy. Hey, alive? Accompanying the question with a poke in the ribs with a stick, the Uchiha asked. It was a stupid plan. Very, Uzumaki said with a suppressed hiss, nevertheless answering and slowly sitting down on the ground. Remind me next time that my animals need a muzzle. Catch, a pack of pills immediately flew at Naruto, which he caught with his face. Is everything that bad? I can't move normally, Uzumaki Elric said, extending his hand to the pack that had fallen to the ground. Okay, Sasuke said, quickly picking up the pack and placing it in the blonde's hand. Like a princess or like a sack of flour? How can you just carry it on your back? Naruto asked in surprise, simply tearing open the pack and throwing several pills into his mouth at once. Well, since you're coming up with more options. It means you can still think soberly, the brunette nodded, and turned his back and squatted down in front of the guy. Can you climb up? Yeah, Uzumaki said, overcoming the pain in his body, slowly getting up and clinging to his friend. It smells like burnt flesh. Not the most pleasant smell, the Uchiha replies, slowly starting his way from the center of the funnel, yet sharp jumps and increased speed can cause his cargo unnecessary pain. The path to the improvised shelter, that same pit near the trees, passed in silence. It contained Tazuna, who had already come to his senses, cooking under the supervision of Haruno, as well as Hataki lying on the ground. Is Naruto okay? Noticing the arrival of the students, Kakashi said through the force, covering his eye. Have you ever been to the place of meat that a novice chef decided to fry? Came from behind Sasuke. Using the beast has left him somewhat irritable and fried, sensei, Sasuke reported in a neutral tone, slowly planting his load against one of the walls. Silence fell, no one knew what to talk about, and they didn't want to. Before everyone's eyes, the image of a Shinigami was still visible, stretching his hand to their faces. Oh, this is not how I imagined my first normal mission, Naruto thought tiredly, slowly drifting off to sleep. When Hatake woke up, he immediately thanked the gods for the fact that the shock wave did not throw him into stones or trees. Even though shinobi are stronger than ordinary people, the fractures still interfere with his work. But such a minus as severe chakra depletion after using the Sharingan still hit him hard. And that is why the gray-haired man walked with a broken gait in the direction where he last saw his students. Gotta get there, gotta make sure they're okay, Kakashi repeated under his breath like a mantra, getting closer to the brink of fainting with every step. And when this very edge was so close, he heard a rustling and a smell reached him. Cherry and printing ink. Sakura, the Jounin said in surprise, still losing his support and falling, but he was not destined to fall. Haruno grabbed the gray-haired man at the very last moment, but he was already falling into the darkness, hearing only a quiet and doomed, "And how can I drag him to the shelter?" He came to his senses from a pleasant smell that was too close to him. Involuntarily drawing in a deeper breath, Kakashi smelled some kind of porridge and fried fish. Opening his eyes slightly, he immediately came across the back of the customer, who was slowly stirring the brew in the pot, and also noticed that Haruno was sitting next to Tazuna, frying fish strung on twigs on the same fire. "Add salt," said the girl, without taking her eyes off the fish, as if frying it was the most important thing for her. "Yeah," the customer answered sluggishly, and with a poorly concealed trembling in his voice. Still, the amount of ki that Naruto released is difficult to survive normally, whether for children or civilians, Hatake thought, and then seemed to be caught on something in his thoughts. A second of thought, and he immediately hissed quietly in an attempt to sit up. "Lie down." Haruno's voice was surprisingly calm, and the girl herself pointed towards Hatake with a branch with a fish clutched in her hand. "Now Sasuke will bring Naruto, everything is fine, everyone is alive, but if you tense up, lie down." Biju, no longer thinking of hiding an already obvious fact from the children, the Jounin croaked. "Well, if we don't feel pressure and don't see a giant creature, then everything is okay?" The girl's voice was calm, but she herself shuddered when asking this question. "If the Jinchu," Kakashi decided to say automatically, shuddering at the thought that appeared in his head, but he didn't have time. "He's fine, okay?" The girl's voice trembled, and she herself was paler than chalk, her gaze was directed towards the fire. "Yes," answered her mentor, hoping in his heart that everything was true. For some time, Hatake passed out again, until he heard someone's heavy footsteps, and breathing, one calm and even, and the other a little heavier. Opening his eyes slightly, he saw the figure of Sasuke carrying Naruto on his back. Alive! The thought shot through the Jounin like thunder. "Is Naruto okay?" Kakashi involuntarily asked the dumbest question in the world, hoping to find out the child's condition. "Here again, jailer?" Opening one eye slightly, the fox growled, looking at the figure that appeared in front of the bars of his cage. "I'll visit you often," the guy said with a frown, looking around. "Where is this one?" "Everything is the same," the bijou grumbled, losing interest in the conversation, and then slightly moving his ears, he spoke again. "He left something there." "Eh?" "Thank you." He was surprised that the fox was too friendly to Naruto, slowly walking towards the gate, in front of which lay what involuntarily forced Uzumaki Naruto to leave, and Edward Elric to appear. The guy laughed quietly and hysterically. There on the floor in front of the gate, a small photo card was floating on the water. "Cattle!" The blonde literally shouted, plunging his palm into the water and pulling out a photo of the still very young Elric brothers, whom Trisha and Hohenheim were holding in their arms. After leaving, God decided to hit him where it hurt. "What the?" The photo immediately began to decay in the young man's fingers, and the world around him changed somewhat. Everything was flooded with golden light, which was not blinding at all. "Sun!" Two silhouettes that appeared in front of Uzumaki Elric shouted in unison. The tall, blue-eyed, blonde man, wearing a cloak pulled over his standard Jonin uniform, was none other than Namikaze Minato, the fourth Hokage. The girl to his left was a little shorter, had scarlet hair that went down almost to the tailbone, and was also dressed in a soft green sundress, with a small scarlet pattern decorating its hem. "Stop," the fourth said quietly, turning his head to the left. "This shouldn't happen, right? Minato?" Kushina's voice sounded very surprised, because their plans were to set the appearance of casts of their consciousnesses to two different triggers. "Naruto?" the parents asked at the same time, turning their gaze to the guy. "I don't understand anything," their son answered, shrugging his shoulders. "Your consciousnesses were extracted from the seal, but this is how they ended up there." "We placed them," said the fourth in the same tone, as if he had this every day. "I should have appeared when the seal fell, and showed you how to close it again and told you where to get the key to it. And I had to help if you decided to compete with the Biju and take yours from him," Tebane, said Alea Habanero, rubbing the back of her head. "Nah, that means I was right after all," Uzumaki Elric muttered with a nod, slowly approaching his parents. "Well, I'm Uzumaki Naruto, your son," the guy said, scratching the back of his head, a slight smile on his face. "Nice to meet you, Dadabayo." Naruto woke up with a jerk. Purely on reflexes, he reached for the pouch with the kunai, but did not find it. A second later an unpleasant sensation came. It was a strong itch mixed with a bit of pain. Glancing at his hands, he saw thick coils of bandages that were not only on his hands, but almost all over his body. The boy involuntarily shuddered, thinking that his whole body would be covered with scars, like one arm, to which Kyubi's barking laughter was heard somewhere inside his skull, and then the phrase, "Last time I just woke up, I didn't think that the vessel will be damaged. This time everything will heal much faster, Warden." Nodding at his demon's remark, Uzumaki Elric looked around the room. It was an ordinary room 2 by 3 meters, the floor was covered with time-worn parquet, on top of which lay a carpet, also fairly worn out by time. A small bookcase was hidden in the corner of the room, not far from a small single-leaf window with an almost rotten frame. "I woke up," a child's voice made the shinobi twitch and instantly throw at the threat the first thing that came to his hand, and that was a rolled-up bandage. And here in front of Uzumaki sits a boy of about 6 years old, with short dark hair. And eyes in which one could see fear mixed with irritation. "Shinobi-san, I think I'll go call one of your friends," the boy muttered, looking at Naruto with a somewhat disappointed look, as he walked out of the room. "Name," Uzumaki managed to wheeze, in order to at least find out who he had just thrown the bandage at. "Inari, Tazuna's grandson," the boy responded, already closing the door behind him, leaving Naruto in the company of his own thoughts. Falling again onto the futon spread on the carpet, the blonde involuntarily winced, feeling the crust on the recently healed burns bursting. But still there was something else that tormented the young man much more. Conversation with parents. It was parents, oddly enough. Naruto remembered both Trisha and Hohenheim, but he also perceived Minato and Kushina as parents. It scared him. For the first time, it seemed to him that pieces of his old world were being erased and replaced by new ones. But these thoughts were immediately discarded because his parents were dead. But there was also a ton of new information. For example, that the Uzumaki and Uchiha clans were allies, because Fugaku, Sasuke's father, was a good friend of the Yondaime, and as a result, of Kushina. But since, in essence, Namikaze was without a clan, the agreement was concluded precisely with the Uzumaki, of whom there was only one person in all of Konoha, Kushina herself, the last representative of the main branch of the clan. Since the shadow clones that were invested in the seal did not spend chakra reserves on sealing or retaining the bijou, they had plenty of time. And that is why Uzumaki woke up only now, in the house of the bridge builder Tazuna. So he probably would have woken up about 10 minutes after he passed out. Yet he had long ago learned to overcome fatigue and pain through sheer willpower. But the guy could not deny himself such a luxury as a conversation with his family. even if they were all just casts of the consciousnesses of long-dead people. He asked them about everything. He was interested in how they met, and how Minato became the yondaime, as well as the history of Kushina before she became a Jinchuriki. And his parents happily gave him this information. Although something still alarmed him, namely that his father mentioned that on some of his missions he saw a guy similar to Naruto. And then, nodding at something, he muttered that this was not particularly important. And no matter how strange it was, he was right. Uzumaki simply wanted to know those who were his parents, and did not dare to interrupt their stories, but only occasionally asked questions. They got so carried away that they completely forgot about time, and the chakra in the clones, alas, was coming to an end. "Son," Minato said then, placing his hand on Naruto's shoulder, while Kushina simply hugged the guy. "Unfortunately, we don't have any time. So, before we disappear," the guy's mother whispered, burying her nose in the top of his head. "Now it's your turn to tell." A slight smile appeared on Namikaze's face again, and hope flashed in his eyes. "Well," Naruto said, hugging his mother with one hand and sharply pulling his father towards him with the other for a general hug. "I live well, I have several truly loyal friends and even a personal stalker fan. I'm bad at ninjutsu, I only know the academic basics, I don't know much about Fuin, but I'm the first shinobi alchemist of my kind. And I also have a dream. I want." But Minato and Kushina could no longer hear. The clones faded away, leaving behind only a haze. The golden light began to fade, and now he stands in front of the gates again. "Go back home," Naruto finished his speech, looking at his empty hands. And then I thought, it's good that they didn't hear this, otherwise they would have asked why this was so, and to explain to them that I remember my past life and got here only by the whim of a crazy god. This would at least scare them, so it's better for them to leave listening to the fact that their child is fine. "Naruto, how are you?" The voice of Sasuke, who had just entered the room, pulled the guy out of his thoughts. "Alive," the guy answered, slowly turning his gaze to his friend. "How long was I unconscious?" 10 o'clock, Sasuke said dryly, sitting down next to the bandaged blonde. "It's even worse here. If Sabuza survived this, then I don't think he'll come to us again, but the local rich man Gato. Judging by the information received, he eliminates those he doesn't like. Do you think he has any more shinobi?" Uzumaki Elric clarified. "Only if it's at the level of the Demon Brothers," the Uchiha said with a frown. "But now we have only me and Haruno among the active team members." "Me too," Uzumaki grumbled, slowly sitting down on the futon and reaching out with his hand to the folded clothes that were next to him. "Don't be stupid, Uzumaki." Even though Sasuke's tone was calm, his eyes spoke for him, in which irritation mixed with emotion flared. "You can barely move." If necessary, pulling out black pants made of thick fabric from the pile, and noticing that among the things there was also his red cloak. "Then I will not only begin to move normally, but I will also go to extreme measures again." Well, Sasuke said extremely gloomily, quickly getting up and heading out. Mizukai Tsunami, the daughter of a notorious alcoholic in the land of waves and part-time bridge builder named Tazuna, arrived with extremely mixed feelings. Recently, her father went for security to the land of fire, and more specifically, to Konoha. The man cheated by asking for an escort, but in reality he needed security for him and the workers who were building the bridge. And he, in turn, was not pleasing to the local authoritarian leader, who was higher in the country than daimyo. At first the girl did not believe that the daring plan that her father came up with while drunk would burn out, but now Tsunami thought that her father had been given the most unnecessary ballast. The captain of the team, entering their house, immediately fell, and two kids dragged him onto the sofa, and then Tazuna himself came in, carrying another boy on his back, and wherever he put his backpack. Tsunami, of course, knew that one becomes a shinobi at the age of 11, but this was the first time she had seen such young shinobi. "Just kids," the girl whispered quietly then, noticing out of the corner of her eye how her little son Inari ran out to meet his grandfather. "Haruno," came the voice of one of the kids, a dark-haired boy in dark shorts and an orange jacket that didn't match him at all. Now, the voice of the pink-haired girl who answered, wearing a chipao that was the same shade as her hair, was somewhat nervous. She quickly began to rummage under her things and finally fished out a small scroll from somewhere, either from a pouch or from a small backpack at her feet. "Tazuna, put it down here." This time the girl's voice was even. She tried to sound calm, but her trembling fingers gave her away. "Father?" Tsunami said, arching her eyebrow questioningly, and was immediately horrified when Tazuna laid the burnt blonde straight on the floor of the hallway. "Everything later." Her father's voice made her shudder. She had not heard such a tone for 20 years. The blonde was undressed, covered in ointments, and also tightly bandaged and dragged into the room that used to belong to Tsunami's husband, who died during an attempt to start a rebellion several years ago. The team captain was fed a handful of pills, and he even came to his senses for a couple of minutes to give the command to guard the facility, that is, the girl's father. The children, like the captain, were introduced to her by her father, but a little later. The woman didn't even try to talk to them, because it was clear that no one was in the mood to chat right now. And then the next morning came. The captain had already more or less come to his senses, but he was moving somewhat jerkily and barely. And he was praising the poor breakfast prepared by Tsunami, when he heard the stomping of feet and Inari looked into the kitchen, saying that he didn't want to have breakfast today. "Gorley has woken up," he muttered irritably, and seeing Sasuke's gaze, he immediately ran out of the house. "I'll go talk to him," the brunette said with a frown. And got up without finishing his breakfast. "Excuse me, son," Tsunami babbled, knowing full well that shinobi could tear ordinary people to pieces even if they were out of shape. "It's okay," Sakura answered her, a kind smile on her face, involuntarily making Mizuki shudder and sadly shake her head at the thought that even such cute children are lured into the ranks of assassins. "Naruto and Sasuke are just friends," their mentor said, distracted from eating, involuntarily making Tsunami admire him. The girl frankly didn't understand why he was wearing a mask on his face. "Nice man, but he looks like a weirdo in her." "I understand, he's just worried about him, right?" Tsunami said, trying to smile as friendly as possible. There was a stomping sound again and an even more gloomy Uchiha flew into the kitchen, who immediately fell into a chair and began to slowly eat food, ignoring the looks of his teammates. Footsteps were heard again, and Naruto appeared in the kitchen. He managed to change out of his burnt clothes and tore off the bandages from his face, revealing the seemingly reddened skin that was hidden underneath. "How?" The chopsticks fell out of Haruno's hand when she saw Uzumaki's face. "Guess," the blonde said kindly and tried to smile, but only grimaced when pain shot through his face. "You're on bed rest." The girl slammed her palms on the table and raised her voice. "I'm capable, Haruno." Naruto's tone was dry, and then he noticed a glass of milk on the table. Tsunami put the last package in front of the guests. "Sasuke, will you have some milk?" One could see how the Uchiha's eyebrow began to twitch, and Uzumaki himself glared at the glass as if he had seen his worst enemy. "If you don't drink, you won't grow up," a strange spark flashed in the brunette's eyes. "Oh, you," an extremely indignant expression appeared on the blonde's face, and the members of his team let out a collective sigh. "Who's so small here that you can't see it from the ground?" A cry full of indignation shook the house, and the patient himself immediately grimaced from the pain shooting through his entire body. Naruto looked at the tree in front of him and kept throwing a kunai in his hand. Near two other trees his teammates were already trying to comprehend the impossible. Well, relatively speaking. Still, shinobi are such animals for whom the word is simply impossible. So vertical lifting without hands, but with the help of chakra, was quite common here. Uzumaki already mastered this skill, as did Uchiha, but he simply couldn't miss the chance to practice and help Sakura with a few words, who, however, coped with this task perfectly. "Not bad," Kakashi assessed the work of the kids, who was sitting next to one of the trees, of which there were a lot in the forest not far from Tazuna's house. A pair of crutches lay in the grass next to him. Hatake was still too weak. After all, the Sharingan was already eating a lot chakra, so he is not yet a native, however, and the sensei himself is far from an Uchiha. Well, I think we can move on to the more difficult part. Then there was a not particularly long path to the seashore, and brief instructions in the style, almost the same as woodworking, just adjust the pressure. In general, it was clear that Kakashi was an ace in practice, but not in lectures, which, however, did not interfere. He occasionally gives very practical advice, and simply shares his experience. We had a case, Hatake said, rubbing the bridge of his nose, when Sakura plunged under the water again. The girl refused to strip down to her underwear and was now diving for the 10th time in her clothes. Sasuke took off everything except the shorts he wore when he was told that training was planned. Uzumaki arrived in only his shorts, which didn't bother him at all. He was more worried that the bandages on his hand would have to be changed again. He was too used to hiding his scar. Even though each of his dives into the entrance was accompanied by a wave of mild pain, not all the burns had healed yet, but the guy tried his best. It was on the border with the grass. Hatake, who had already taken off his mask from his face and was slowly crunching an apple pulled out from nowhere, was still broadcasting. The Kusananovs had one bunker. Well, one of my comrades went out alone to destroy everyone there. There was zero lighting, the ceilings were high, but the corridors were narrow. Crawling along the top he covered everything with tags on the explosion, and then on the way out he noticed him. He was a good guy, and the bunker banged nicely. Hatake remembered it as if it all happened yesterday. One of the few missions at the front in which their team was without a mentor, but the task indicated that they could take the entire garrison there to help, although they had already suffered losses. It was terribly hot, even if the shinobi experienced it easier, but still the temperature affected even them. Hordes of small midges managed to reach the team even on the approach to Point 4. Symbolic, Hatake thought then, looking around at the 5 bunkers and several tents that were located behind an obviously artificially created hill. Oh. New ones? A guy of about 19 met them, but had already survived several dozen serious battles, as evidenced by the scar on his face and a slightly creaking knee, an obvious prosthesis. Why are you here? We must ensure a breakthrough in this direction, Hatake said as dryly as possible, taking out a scroll with a report from his pouch, noting out of the corner of his eyes the too serious expression on the idiot Obito's face. Even though his eyes were still hidden behind his stupid glasses, they were too focused on the surroundings. For the first time in memory, Kakashi Uchiha was extremely collected. He clearly felt that they were in complete ass. Minato-sensei was urgently pulled to the front line, while giving his team an obviously suicidal mission. Oh, in the name of Kami, this will be very difficult, Kakashi thought, and motioned for the Uchiha to begin inspecting the surroundings, who instantly took off from his place as a blurry shadow. Are your medications okay? Rin finally decided to speak up when they were already on the approaches to the tents. Do you see those hills? Pointing his finger at small piles of stones, at the very edge of the camp, their guide said. All our doctors are there. So the question with medicines is not appropriate. Not every one of us took first aid courses. Oh Kami, how are you here? The girl said in surprise when they were already standing near a large tent, placed in a small depression in the ground, so that the hill covered it all. Yes, as always, the guide said, making a theatrical gesture with his hand. I am Kojiro, Tokubetsu Jounin, and welcome to the death row garrison. A little later they all gathered in a large tent. There were at most a dozen guys there, all no older than 20, but all the horror of this war was already reflected in their eyes. On a small table in the middle of the tent there was a map of the area, full of notes. Passage 4 is no longer valid, said the dark-haired girl, with a slanting scar across her face, the very edge of which touched her right eye socket, where there was an ugly burn spot. Tatsu was looking and fell into a wolf pit. This scum smeared the spears with poison. Something nerve paralytic. Tatsu? Kojiro asked, raising an eyebrow, biting his lips, and immediately starting to beat out an uneven rhythm with his finger on the map. Stayed there, the girl literally spat out, and then hit the table with her fist. It creaked pitifully, and a crack crawled somewhere under the map. You know they have alarms everywhere. I would not return with him in my arms. The commander hissed. For a moment there was silence in the tent, which was destroyed by the crackle of the walkie-talkie. Psh. Ko. Here at. Uchiha, came from the walkie-talkie abruptly and mixed with interference. There are mines about 7. Don't you dare, Kagami. Holding down the radio button, Kojiro hissed. The Uchiha is a new arrival, don't start mining without a command. Don't mine. PSSH. That's right. Came in response, and the Tokubetsu Jounin himself exhaled with relief. So, you, Kojiro said, glancing at Kakashi and Rin. Did they give you the scrolls? Yes, the girl said instantly, throwing off her shoulder a backpack completely filled with storage scrolls. Someone from the garrison, namely a boy no older than Hatake himself, took the scroll and opened it. The entire floor was dotted with explosion seals. In the name of Amaterasu, the boy said in shock. Hope appeared in his eyes. Ikari, what the one-eyed girl decided to explode in a tirade, but Kojiro immediately shut her up with one gesture. Well, little one? Is your plan still on? In the voice of the Tokubetsu Jounin one could hear hope mixed with anticipation. Yes, the boy's voice sounded muffled, but there was something strange in it, as if Ikari was about to do something suicidal. These creatures will answer for my brother. Hey, Kazuto. Holding down the button on the walkie-talkie, speak to Kojiro again. Uchiha to headquarters urgently. To all posts, Plan 23 will be implemented within 2 days. PSH. Are you screwed? Came from the walkie-talkie, and then there was only silence. Everyone was silent, waiting for Obito to return. Kakashi-sensei. I managed. Sakura's voice pulled Hatake out of her memories. The girl, although wet to the skin, was standing on the water incredibly happy, while the Uchiha was drowning again, and Naruto kept falling with one foot into the water. Well done Sakura, excellent control, Kakashi said, smiling slightly under the mask that had been pulled back onto his face, involuntarily comparing the girl with his long-dead teammate. With such control, you should go to the doctors. So I know, Sasuke and Naruto gave me the necessary literature after distribution. The girl smiled, slowly but confidently walking towards the shore. When we get back, we need to sign up for courses. Fortunately, I've learned almost everything needed for the entrance exam to Irionen. The Uchiha shouted, going knee-deep into the water, and then, growling angrily, he hit the water with his fist with all his might. In the silence, the quiet grinding of Uzumaki's teeth was clearly heard, which also began to go under the water, and the clap of Sasuke's palm on the water. Kanami's shout broke the silence that had established itself as they advanced towards the Kyuzunin fortifications. He held his leg with his hands, blood poured from under his palms. Everyone immediately stood in a circle, covering Ikari, who was walking in an embrace with a tightly stuffed backpack. Rin stood next to him as the only medic in the group. For 3 hours, Kaname managed to say, and then flakes of foam began to escape from his mouth, and he himself fell to the ground and began to convulse. Hatake looked all around trying to find where the deadly blow came from. So he noticed how the foliage of one of the trees twitched. They're in the trees. Kakashi shouted, immediately making the seals for the fireball. All the other members of the squad who owned fire also began to make seals for techniques. Someone even ended up with air and managed to strengthen a couple with their gust of wind. A fire started in the forest. Immediately, hundreds of kunai flew into the squad through the flames, repulsed by the same shinobi with the wind. Then a giant boulder flew at them, which someone poured oil on, which immediately ignited when passing through the flames. They have Earthmen. Kojiro shouted, jumping to the side, like many others, so that when he landed, he would plunge into the ground up to his knees. Something squeezed his legs with incredible force, crushing muscles and crushing bones. The Tokubetsu Jounen's cry of pain drowned out the roar of the flames. They are underground. Obito shouted in panic, grabbing Rin and Ikari by the arms. So they jumped to the side, and in their place only the Uchiha's pouch remained, and he himself made a seal of concentration. Everything was shaken by the explosion. The pouch was filled with explosion seals. He raised a wave of dust and wind, as well as small stone chips that dug into the bodies of the shinobi no worse than kunai. "Good move," came the voice of Kasumi. That same one-eyed girl, she was holding her hand on her shoulder, and a small pebble also hit her. "We may have gotten it too, but they probably got more." "Yeah," Obito muttered in shock, finally letting go of Rin and Ikari's hands. "Well, I think it's time," Kasumi said. All the shinobi stood in a circle again. They felt that the Kuzenins were surrounding them again. But few people noticed that Ikari's figure had disappeared somewhere. The boy, despite his frail appearance, was a master of his craft. Ikari mastered the chameleon cloak technique, and was a good miner and hunter. He ended up in the death row garrison because he disobeyed the captain. He did not want to throw away his brother's body. But today the guy wanted one thing, namely revenge. He crept in the shadows, almost without touching the foliage, he hid in it. Here comes a dash, and he flies over the heads of the Kuzenin patrol, who are rushing towards the besieged distraction group. This was to Ikari's benefit, especially since he noticed where the shinobi were coming from. Finding the entrance was not difficult. Now the guy is already crawling along the ceiling, glued to it with chakra, sticking seals along the way. He hasn't been breathing for several minutes, afraid that his breathing will give him away. In his heart he praises those who decided to make the bunker spacious with fairly high ceilings. "Do you think we'll finally make our way in this direction?" A tired voice rang out. Ikari turned his head slightly, finally noticing that he was already at the local command headquarters. "Knows him, it's all somehow." Ikari didn't listen to the end. He simply stuck the remains of the seals on the ceiling and began to leave as quickly as possible. And right at the exit they noticed him. "Did you feel it?" muttered one of the Kuzenins, catching a gust of air. It was the hem of Ikari's cloak, which suddenly began to move after a quick stop. Slowly the man looked up. With a quiet click in his hand the light came on. "Alarm!" The Kuzenin shouted as loudly as possible, noticing strange distortions in the air and immediately realizing what it was. Throwing off his cloak, Ikari ran forward at his maximum speed. A smile blossomed on his face against his will. Right as he walked, he made a seal of concentration. At the same moment a kunai flew into his shoulder, and yet he was already almost at the exit. "For you, Gendo," the guy whispered. "Cats." Everything was shaken by the explosion. Hataki only later learned that a boy his age had killed himself to fulfill his goal. And no one said a word about him later. He was another nameless war hero, whom only those who served with him knew about. "What's wrong with him?" Sakura asked quietly, watching their sensei eat an apple for 5 minutes, and look into nothing. "Maybe he's thinking about our training?" Sasuke muttered. Slowly and somehow he stayed on the water, but it was already more difficult to take a step. "Just don't bother him," Naruto said with an idiotic smile, taking a cautious step forward, and it was a success. "Hooray!" he shouted and, losing concentration, immediately plunged into the water. The Uzumaki, wincing, pulled off the last bandage, revealing the newly grown skin. Exhaling tiredly, the guy cast a sidelong glance at the pile of dressing material that was piled up in a lump on the boy's left hand. Getting up from the ground, Naruto stretched and smiled slightly, feeling that finally nothing hurt him. Amazing, just a few days, the thought flashed through his head. will this redhead be able to grow a limb? Indulging in such thoughts, the blonde slowly began to walk around the clearing in which he was staying. He arrived here early in the morning. Fortunately, the training from the mentor ended very quickly, and it was dangerous to teach anything else outside the village. Although maybe Hatake was still unwell? Naruto, of course, always noticed oddities in the mentor of the 7th team, but he had never been stuck for hours on end. However, everyone has the right to their own quirk, right? It was with this thought that the blonde straightened his cloak. In general, Uzumaki did not want to wear it on missions. It was still a revealing factor, but while collecting things, he automatically sealed it too. However, the obsession with this thing has subsided somewhat, because now he at least remembered such a thing as disguise, and did not put it on himself and trudged forward, luring all the bulls to him. The boy involuntarily shivered, remembering the snow-covered expanses of Briggs, and the thin ice crust that covered all his clothes, including his beloved raincoat. Idiot, Uzumaki Elric gave himself a mental description, thinking about how he stood out against the background of the snow with his uniform. But as already mentioned, now this strange mania for wearing a raincoat everywhere and everywhere has somewhat relieved him, even though he rarely parted with it in everyday life, but he realized that it was of little use for tasks. Except perhaps as a distraction. He was distracted from his thoughts by a sound. It was the rustling of grass under someone's foot. Slowly Naruto turned around, out of the corner of his eye noticing someone's figure in a yukata, which, judging by the pose, was picking either flowers or herbs. Am I disturbing you? The unknown man slowly stood up and turned to Naruto. She was a pretty girl, with a soft face, an unexpectedly gentle smile and expressive dark brown eyes. For a moment, the blonde became too enchanted and fell out of reality, to which the unknown woman laughed a little. No, not a bit, Uzumaki Elric said with a slight frown, finally coming out of his stupor. In his head he was already covering himself with obscene words, for not only having missed the approach of the unknown, but also for losing control over himself. Still, tender age, hormones and so on, so Uzumaki was always tense and kept himself on a short leash, if one can put it that way, of course. And what did you forget here? Taking a few steps forward, and stumbling over a tree root that he had not noticed in the grass, Naruto asked. Are you okay? The girl's voice was filled with concern, but something, and a bit of pretense, Uzumaki Elric instantly discerned in it. Still not getting up from the ground, he slowly brought his hand together, trying to control the entire transformation process, in an attempt to reduce the unmasking factor. But alas! A chain of discharges ran across the ground, as if lightning, and then it reared up, releasing a couple of stone spikes from its depths. They were released with the intention of scaring the girl if she was an ordinary civilian, but if she was a shinobi, she would have evaded instantly. With a sharp jerk, the blonde jumped up from the ground and saw nothing. More precisely, only one thing, a small basket that was dropped by an unknown kunoichi. I made the right decision, Naruto mentally contrasted, yet his instinct was always with him. And the guy found out a couple of facts about the place where he was. For example, the fact that none of the locals go to this forest, unless bandits drop in here. The beast here is strong, and the people of the land of waves are accustomed to eating seafood, so they even somehow forgot that they have a whole forest nearby, chock full of not only abandoned meat, but also other delights. But they still complain about the lack of food. Yuki Haku never considered himself a strong shinobi, but what's more, he always adhered to a simple rule: no matter who he faced, it was better to assume that the enemy was stronger than you. For only by thinking this way did the guy give his all, even if the one he impaled on ice spikes turned out to be a real weakling. But a few minutes ago, it was this simple rule that saved Yuki's life. Initially, Haku simply wanted to collect the necessary herbs, which were needed for infusions that relieved pain. Zabuza was very bad, and as soon as his mentor more or less came to his senses, pride immediately surged within him. He stopped caring that the enemy had such weapons as Jinchuriki, all he wanted was to just finish what he started. It was at such moments that Yuki understood why Momochi was nicknamed Demon. The grin of the beast instantly crawled onto Zabuza's face at such moments. And the thirst for blood pierced even Yuki, who had long been accustomed to this. And even in this state, his mentor became more active. If usually he was somewhat lazy and in no hurry, now he was burning with a thirst for action, each of which was reflected in pain throughout his body. And besides, the demon of the mist had his own rules, one of which was standard for any mercenary: have you accepted the task? Hurt yourself, but do it. So Momochi needed both painkillers and stimulants of various kinds, because without them he would simply be unable to do anything to oppose the copy ninja and his ace. And as already mentioned, Haku went specifically for the ingredients for them, but to his surprise, he came across one of the children who arrived with Hataki in the forest, and the most powerful and dangerous one. The blond man sat under a tree, carefully removing the coils of bandages from himself and folding them next to him. For a moment, Yuki was taken aback, examining the boy's bare torso. A few days ago, when he went into a rage, all his skin burned off, a severe burn, but now only new skin reminded him of it. This was visible from its slightly pinkish tint. This is who the real demons are, Yuki thought angrily, remembering the atrocities of another tailed bearer in his home country. Meanwhile, the Jinchuriki pulled off the last round of bandages, threw a scarlet cloak over his bare torso, and stretched. And then the guy noticed Haku, slowly turning around. He called out to Yuki, allowing him to see him without hiding his gaze. The boy's face was surprisingly gloomy, but immediately smoothed out for a moment. Apparently he, like many, mistook Haku for a girl and fell in love with her. Meanwhile, Yuki examined his face. The scars on his face disappeared. Last time he saw him briefly, but clearly remembered a burn on his cheek, and 3 scars on the other, but now they were gone. It's funny, having burned all the skin, new growth has grown as if he never had scars, Haku thought, thinking about what to say to the guy. But he unexpectedly fell awkwardly after the phrase he uttered, but something was wrong. Yuki noticed his eyes, they were too focused. And a trained shinobi, albeit still a genin, diving headlong into the tall grass was a cause for concern. So the last of Yuki instantly released chakra through his body, expecting an attack, and did it just in time. Stone stakes flew out of the grass, scattering clods of earth around them, and somewhere among this the guy noticed flashing lightning. At maximum speed, he rushed away, glancing over his shoulder, noticing only a small hole from which stone spears protruded and the concentrated gaze of multicolored eyes that looked around the forest around. Sakura lazily looked around the bridge. She had long since come to her senses after Momochi's attack, yet her flexible psyche was her significant advantage, and it doesn't matter that she locked all her adversities and fears inside herself, not giving them a way out, thereby generating a powerful psychological bomb in your mind. Moreover, she simply could not afford to panic. Still, the desire to get closer to the Uchiha was stronger than her own adversity. She will show her weakness at home, sobbing into her pillow and remembering the smell of blood and burnt flesh. But under no circumstances now, at the moment when it is needed. And not only Sasuke, but also their mentor Kakashi, and why bother with trifles, and Uzumaki too. Although maybe these were just things she thought up. It was precisely these thoughts that the girl was loaded with, and from time to time she looked around the bridge under construction, in search of any elements that were not taken into account. Sasuke was already winding for probably the 100th circle in the water, around the supports of the future bridge. The guy tried to combine work with training. After all he could do was train. Because the Uchiha was weak. In his own opinion, naturally. Ever since the night of the massacre, Sasuke decided to become stronger, first for the sake of killing his brother, and only then for the sake of protecting those who remained. Since it is better to strive for protection than for revenge. And Izao and Ayumi would not have understood his aspirations, because they also experienced a lot, but they gave all of themselves to their small family. How can I become stronger? Sasuke thought wearily, from this thought his old nightmares, his brother's voice and the roar of an unprecedented beast immediately surfaced in his head. Of course, now the guy already knew that that roar was not at all from his brother's comrade, but from Naruto, who had escaped from the cut, who was trying to save Ayumi, so the roar no longer seemed hostile to him, but fear still captured him in a sticky embrace. But the realization that someone whom he had once considered an ordinary person with a little more knowledge than others could in fact destroy the entire leaf in one fell swoop did not make him any better. If at the beginning of their friendship he looked at the boy condescendingly, then later his strange techniques began to cause envy, and the subsequent story about the true nature of the guy made the Uchiha think for a long time. After all, Naruto's burden was heavy, somewhere on the level with Sasuke's, or maybe heavier. The brunette still hasn't resolved this issue for himself. But he knew one thing for sure. No matter what decision he made in his life, Uzumaki Naruto would follow him and support him, and the same applied to the blonde on the Uchiha side. Uzumaki Elric was thoughtful. For several minutes he had been looking into nowhere, leaning on the railing of the unfinished bridge. Thoughts that had visited him a couple of dozen times already ran through the young man's head like fussy cockroaches. And they were about the entity that let him into this world, allowing him to circumvent his own law. After all, the law is simple: if you want to receive, then give in return. And if the price for passage into this world awaits him somewhere at the end of his journey, then how does all this relate to returning home? And besides, truth appeared before him in this world, and had already helped him several times. But the payment was not taken. Or was it? So what does he give? And what must you find in this world to return back? Elric did not know this. Although he had a vague feeling as if he remembered his price, but it still did not want to emerge in his memory. At times it seemed as if Naruto had already grabbed it with his fingers, but it seeped through his grip like sand. This infuriated Uzumaki Elric. That, however, did not stop him from behaving as usual, albeit a little more impulsively. And that's exactly what Naruto did when he felt something strange. Waving his hand to the Uchiha who was standing a couple of meters away from him and intently casting gloomy glances at the workers, the guy rushed towards the customer's house. Sakura should have been there now. The mentor insisted that at least someone guard the house. You never know, Gato would send someone to Tazuna's family. The road was covered in about 40 seconds. Good girl, but what have you forgotten among the shinobi? A vile voice reached Naruto's ears when he was about to unlock the door to Tazuna's house. It came from inside. Sakura, whistling to herself, washed the plates. Today it was her turn to look after Tsunami and Inari, or rather only the girl, since it was too stressful to look after the little tomboy, and he didn't listen to any prohibitions. He just whined in response and ran away from home. But Tsunami's little help was a joy for the girl. She reminded her of her mother, and doing such little things the girl felt a little more comfortable. But she herself understood perfectly well that even here she could not relax. The bandits were not asleep, and the local bigwig, according to unverified information, had almost 100 of them. So she was still on her guard, and when the door did not creak as usual, but slammed against the wall with all its might, the girl was not at all confused, but only pointed Tsunami's eyes at the ceiling, hinting that she had better run to the second floor. Judging by their voices, there were 2 of them, but their speech consisted almost entirely of foul language. Having entered inside, they immediately began to throw away the little furniture that was in the hallway and moved on, swearing dirtily at the whole house. The girl decided to strike preemptively, and in the direction of the door, which was essentially just an opening in the wall, she threw a couple of balls. That was a smoke bomb and her pepper companion. A cloud of smoke mixed with ground red pepper immediately filled half the kitchen, as well as part of the corridor. Muffled obscenities and a wild cough were heard from him. Sakura was just about to think that she had already won, when one of the bandits flew out of the smoke screen. He was tall and had slightly dark skin. His hairstyle was rather strange. His hair was pulled back into 2 small buns, but for some reason there was a small forelock on the very top of his head. The man frantically rubbed his watery eye with one hand. He had only one eye, in place of the second there was a black bandage, and with the other he was waving a katana. From the very corner of his reddened eye, he noticed the girl's figure, blurry for his vision. The girl froze in a stupor. She was already seeing her own death, almost like that time with the demon brothers. Meanwhile, the bandit, shrouded in anger, rushed toward Sakura and struck her with an oblique blow with a katana. And it hit, but not so hard. It only cut the skin on the girl's face. The wound began above the left eyebrow and went down through the bridge of the nose to the chin. The pain that struck Haruno's consciousness pulled her out of her stupor, and also awakened something that the girl felt extremely rarely. And it wasn't fear. A quick step behind the enemy's back and a blow to the knee came out surprisingly easily for her, and the subsequent blow with her heel on the back of the enemy who had fallen to the ground was almost perfect. The pink-haired girl even thought that she could hear his vertebrae cracking. But there were two opponents, so the girl immediately turned around to find another opponent, but alas, a heavy fist flew right into her nose, which broke with a disgusting slurping sound. The blow was so strong that the girl was thrown back and her back hit the cabinet. Haruno lost consciousness. "Viraji, how is it?" the second bandit said with contempt in his voice as he emerged from the cloud of the curtain. He had a cap pulled over his eyes, and he covered his mouth with the sleeve of his jacket. Slowly, he pulled his cap up, revealing a pair of close-set brown eyes, and then pulled his sleeve away from his mouth, revealing a bloodthirsty grin. "Well, just lie down for now," the gray-haired man said, disgustedly poking his comrade's side with the toe of his boot, and hearing his muffled groan. "Oh ho ho, look how beautiful she is!" the bandit shouted enthusiastically. He slowly bent down and grabbed the girl by the throat with his hand. Without much effort, he lifted her off the ground. Sakura immediately came to her senses. The anger that was raging in her was immediately swept away by fear when she saw the face of her opponent so close. His reddened brown eyes, many small scars on his face, and cracked lips that were so close to her. A slight pain pricked her as the blade of his tanto cut through her clothing, followed by her skin. The pink-haired girl understood perfectly well what would follow next. The strength left her. Haruno didn't even think to resist when the villain's lips covered hers, and the desire to bite off his tongue, which instantly invaded her mouth, was immediately driven away by another injection of pain. A new cut appeared on her body. "Good girl, but what have you forgotten among the shinobi?" this bastard said, smiling disgustingly, when he finally stopped tormenting Sakura's lips. "Good boy, but what have you forgotten?" a voice came from behind the gray-haired man, and the tip of a kunai appeared from his throat. The hand of the failed rapist unclenched and Haruno fell to the ground. Meanwhile, the knife left the gray-haired man's throat, and his hands immediately tried to pinch the blood gushing from the wound, but alas, it was all in vain. Among the corpses? None other than Uzumaki Naruto finished his sentence, kicking the choking man under the knee with all his might and forcing him to fall. For an instant, his eyes changed color, and his heavy-booted foot fell onto the enemy's skull without any hesitation. When Naruto rushed off the bridge at his maximum speed, Sasuke realized that the notorious Uzumaki sense had worked again. Which the guy very rarely used for its intended purpose, because usually it reacted when Iruka's chalk flew into his skull, if the guy's consciousness considered the activity boring and dragged him into sleep. But since it worked, then something happened. However, you shouldn't think about the bad, but it definitely wouldn't hurt to prepare. These are the thoughts that flashed through the brunette's head. The chakra was immediately directed to the eyes, even if the Sharingan had not yet been awakened, but even such a minuscule as a slightly increased clarity of vision was important. The power slowly began to circulate through the body, trying to nourish almost every muscle. The hip holster opened with a quiet click, and the guy's finger grabbed one of the knives by the ring and, as if by chance, began to twirl the kunai on his finger. The red jacket lay on the railing of the bridge. Because carrying so many explosive seals on yourself, Naruto stuffed them there the very next day he recovered from his wounds, is clearly not worth it in an intense battle, but luring the enemy to the edge of the bridge and blowing up the jacket, let him and a card trophy wouldn't be a bad idea. Hatake naturally noticed both the departure of one of the students and the preparation of the other, but the gray-haired man's reaction to this was somewhat simpler. Only a slight smile under the mask. Kakashi had been expecting the attack for a couple of days already. After all, 2 weeks had already passed since the attack, and if Zabuza survived, then he was already making a plan of attack, and taking Naruto into account. Remembering the Jinchuriki, the Jounin involuntarily winced, thinking about how best to present information about the blonde's use of Bija chakra. And whether it was worth telling it to anyone at all, well, perhaps except for his personal teacher, known to Hatake from his service in ANBU. Well, Uzumaki will survive the battle with little things. The main thing is that Zabuza comes to us, then I'll get Uchiha out. And Tazuna hasn't come here for like a week now, Hatake thought while sniffing, and then shuddered. A new smell appeared on the bridge, which was coming out from the smell of fish, and it was the stench of blood. Fog began to creep across the bridge, but Hatake reacted to this somewhat lazily, or rather demonstratively lazily, and only raised his hand with his index finger aimed at the sky, telling Sasuke the number of opponents spotted by his mentor. The Uchiha slowly moved towards Tazuna, carefully leading him from the far part of the bridge closer to the exit. In response to his actions, the fog sharply intensified, covering the entire bridge in moments. "Long time no see, Kakashi," a voice came from somewhere out of the milky white veil. It was neutral, which quite surprised Hatake, since in the last meeting he had been filled with demonstrative contempt and anger. Did he really take us for opponents and not small fish? Thought the gray-haired man, but said out loud in a somewhat infantile tone, "Yo, it's been a while." 2 weeks? Sakura, wrapped in a scarlet cloak, cried, now and then looking down at the corpse in the corner of the kitchen. No, the broken throat didn't frighten her, but for a moment the scarlet color flashed in Naruto's eyes, and his massive boot smashing the skull of the failed rapist like an overripe watermelon pretty much frightened her, and besides, she simply burst. If there had not been this attack, she would have simply sobbed quietly into her pillow at home, but now she was sobbing bitterly, occasionally feeling the warm touch of Naruto's palm, then sat next to her, leaning his back on the kitchen cabinet. Turning her gaze to her savior, she still found the strength in herself to say thank you to him through her tears, and then, in a fit of emotion, hug him, pressing him to her, to which he, to his surprise, did not resist, although he was not seen to have a love for close contacts. A ring of hands closed around the girl, the blonde hugged her back, and began to whisper something stupidly comforting. It was in this state that Tsunami met the children and mistook the silence for the end of the fight. The woman, not paying attention to the corpse, as well as to the living bandit that was lying in the middle of the kitchen, immediately rushed towards the children, but halfway she tripped and fell into a pool of flowing blood, a thin sunbon sticking out of her neck. Standing in the doorway was a figure wearing a white mask, with the symbol of mist on his forehead. "Jinchuriki? My master sent me to deal with you," the unknown person said in a slightly muffled voice. This is where the story ends.